meeting, just kind of?
Sure.
Awesome. So we'll do that in just a second. Sorry to put you on the spot.
You're fine.
All right, Mila, let me know when we're actually streaming. I know there's a delay.
We should be good. You'll hear it start to echo. There we go. We should be live.
All right. Okay. So if you are on YouTube and you're listening and you tried to sign in with the link in the packet and it didn't work, sorry about that. We are addressing it right now. I am going to read out here the information to join, and Mila is also going to post to Facebook, and she's going to share a slide and just keep it on the screen for a bit. So hopefully that will allow everybody to join who wants to. So the meeting ID, the updated meeting ID is 854-7258-6014. And the passcode is 178954. I'm going to read those off again really quick. 854-7258-6014 is the meeting ID, and 178954 is the passcode. And we'll read that out again as we get a little bit closer to the next hour. So if anybody wants to join in the back half, they'll be able to do that as well. Okay, and with that, yes, sorry.
I think I was just thinking, isn't if we post a live Zoom link to Facebook, doesn't that open us up to Zoom bombers? I think I'll repost a page on the Agenda Center and then post an update on Facebook that the link can be found there. Because I think otherwise we just have like a invitation to join our meeting out in the world, which, you know, I'm sure not that many people want to Zoom bomb the Planning Commission meeting, but I think best practices is that we don't do that. So I will take care of that, and I'll probably just be a few minutes.
Okay, awesome. Well, while Mila is doing that, we'll go ahead and call to order at 4:05, our regular meeting. What I think we'll do is let's just get through the first few things of the agenda, see if anybody joins, and then we'll open up citizens to be heard. And then we also have another citizens to be heard at the top of the next hour. So that way we can make sure everyone gets an opportunity to speak. Okay, so let's start just by ex parte communications and disclosures. We've got a few different things on the agenda today. Does anybody have any ex parte communication that they'd like to disclose or any disclosures to make? All right, moving on to approval of meeting minutes from October 26th. Does anyone have any comments about the minutes? No corrections? All right, with that, if there is a motion to approve the minutes.
I move that we approve the minutes.
Okay, is there a second? Rachel seconds. All right, so motion from Bob, seconded by Rachel to approve the meeting minutes from October 26, 2020. I'm sorry, I can't see you all, so raise your hand, say aye. Rachel, Kevin, Emily, Josie, Bob. Okay, awesome. Fantastic. And Jaylyn, welcome. Jaylyn, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We can. We moved the county update, the county council update to the top of the call, since I know you may need to drop early on some of these. So how do you feel about taking that on right now?
Right now, sure. I can give it a go. Yeah, I'll turn my video on reluctantly. Oh, okay. So let me get that screen open. Okay, so the thing that's being worked on in the very near future, like tomorrow probably, or later today, is CARES Act grant funding. Grand County got $1.2 million for CARES Act grant funding. We voted a long time ago to to earmark 500,000 of that roughly for business and local businesses and local special service districts, to have grants to them. So we've got way more grant applications than we have funding for. So that's going to be one of the major jobs, is to go through all of that. As you all know, we're working on the budget, and it will be ready to go to public hearing on December 1st. Also have a group working on special events permitting stipulations, so that businesses, entities that run events will have a little bit more certainty, at least in terms of if the status in Grand County changes from low risk to intermediate risk to high risk, they will need to have plans in place for all three of those situations, and these stipulations will give them notification that they may need to adjust, so that rather than just canceling an event, hopefully they can adjust. The other thing that went to public hearing last council meeting is the Consolidated Fee Schedule. And as part of that, one of the major changes is the event permitting fee. Rather than one flat fee for all events, it will now be, assuming it passes at the next council meeting, well, after the public hearing closes, it will be a fee structure based on the number. It'll be tiered based on the number of participants. So if you have 5,000 participants, you'll pay significantly more than someone who, say, has 50 participants. Another part of that, and this will be a separate fee, is we're looking at the possibility of a COVID-19 fee. If your event requires way more law enforcement to make sure people are staying safe and following the guidelines and being compliant with all of the new COVID-19 things that are put into place, then you would pay an additional fee. It's turned out to be way more complicated than we thought, and Mallory and her team are still working on that to make it fair, so that the county can cover their costs of helping to support those events, but not making it so expensive that it then prices event organizers out of the Moab market. So let's see, those are, oh wait, there's one more. Also working on, let's see, at the December 1st meeting, the public hearing will close on an ordinance amending parts of the code that governs the administrative hearing process. Currently, apparently, we don't have a way to enforce code violations with civil penalties. We only had a way to enforce them with criminal penalties, which isn't appropriate in many cases. So assuming that passes, we will then have that ability to do that. It will give the Grand County Sheriff's Office more leeway to enforce violations, and hopefully that will help with some of the enforcement issues we're having in our county. That is all I have for now. If you have questions, I'll try to answer them.
And we get one more meeting with you here, right? Until you take off. I've heard your news. I saw it in the paper.
My plan is to go ahead and fulfill these duties through the end of the year and possibly the first week in January. That way, when the new commission appoints the new commissioner, there won't be such a big gap between. So, you know, we do everything on Zoom anyway, so I think that'll work out fine. So hopefully 2 more meetings.
2 more meetings. Lovely. Well, I'm sad we only get 2, but very excited for the adventures that you will be embarking on.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Jalen? All right. Well, thank you for jumping up and getting in the hot seat a little earlier there. Wonderful. Now, Mila, I think you were going to introduce Amy, and then we'll
Yes.
sort of carry on with our standard fare.
Sounds good. And I do have a PDF slide if anybody would like for the new meeting info. I added it to the agenda center under the link is under the media, link to media for this meeting. So we are so thrilled to have Amy here with us. She's just joined our department, I think last week, right? 2 weeks? Hard to remember. She is actually coming back to Moab after having grown up here, which is very exciting. And I will let her tell you a little bit more about her.
Thank you, Mila. Fun to be home, fun to be part of the group. So thank all of you. As Mila said, I'm born and raised Moabite. Back in the day, my dad was a doctor here in Moab for 37 years. My mother, Mary Mayberry, is still here and is the heart and soul of the local Valley Voices. And she's been missing singing to all of you this whole year, especially Veterans Day was a big deal for her. So, but love being home again. Love being in the beautiful environment of the Grand County. So this is going to be a thrill, but I have a background in the vertical. I've been doing architecture and business development for Salt Lake City firms for design and construction for about 16 years with my own company. But find myself here now and saw the opportunity this fall to be part of Mila's team. And she's welcomed me, and here we are.
Well, welcome. We look forward to seeing you on more of these calls.
I'm sure.
And hopefully not calls for very much longer. We will hope. Lovely. Okay. Well, welcome, Amy. All right. So I know that Mila has added the meeting information to the agenda center on the county page. I am just going to one last time, for those listening into YouTube, read out the updated meeting invitation, and then we will have our top of the meeting citizens to be heard. It looks like one person has joined, and then we'll do that again in about an hour for anybody who joins later. So if you are on YouTube and you're wanting to join, the meeting ID, which is different from what was in the original packet, is 854-7258-6014. The passcode to get in is 178954. If you want to call in, that information I think is in the Agenda Center, or you can call in via the Zoom app. So Reed and Olivia, Olivia, hi. Reed, I see that you've joined. Would you like to make a comment for citizens to be heard?
Not really. I was more waiting for the public hearings. The only comment I had looking at the agenda was your potential talking about tiny homes today. I know that can be kind of a tricky subject because I don't think tiny homes actually have a building code that they have to follow. Also, tiny homes that are built on wheels are theoretically RVs is what they're usually classified. So I'm just interested to see what you guys talk about on that stuff.
I was muted. All right. Thank you, Reed, very much for your comments. And let's move on to our discussion item, use table updates, looking at conditional uses.
So hopefully it was clear to everybody how this works. It was impossible to get the comments and the use table on the same page without making it, absolutely minuscule. So these lines all line up. So if you can, look at these pages side by side, then that should hopefully work for you. We do have some updated comments. I can do a screen share. I wanted to see, Emily, how you want to go through this during the meeting. We can do a screen share with the comments of the Google Doc, or just of the packet with the use table, or however you'd like to do it.
Yep. So just a reminder, we are picking up from work that we had left on the table a few months ago prior to the COVID pandemic and the work of the last few months, looking at our existing use tables, specifically looking for areas where conditional uses either don't have appropriate or in some cases even any development standards that can be used in order to provide the conditions in which those permits could be allowed, those uses could be allowed. And also just sort of more generally taking a look through these use tables and calling out anything that looks like a discrepancy or something that might need more detail or need to be broken out into its own line item. So given the sort of funkiness of the packet and the funkiness of the table, as long as the information in the packet reflects the most up-to-date comments, I think we're probably fine just talking to the different items, and that way we're not getting confused in how things sort of lay out. Okay. So the two sections that we're reviewing today are residential uses and public and civic uses. And let's just kind of line by line go through and call out anything that seems controversial or questions open for discussion. And if anything starts to get into being too much of a conversation, we might just table that and then come back to it after we go through the full table.
Okay, sorry, I'm trying to help people get in here. So how did you want to do the screen share?
Why don't you screen share the table just to start?
Just
And
from the
then-
code?
I'm from the packet, the table that's in the packet right now.
Just in the packet. Okay,
Mhm,
cool. We
yeah.
can do that. Oh, come on.
And really quick, are there comments for these two sections in the Google Doc that aren't reflected in the packet? Because if that's the case, we may need to share the Google Doc actually in order to be transparent.
I think Kevin and Garish had a few extra comments that came in after the packet was out.
It's possible I did as well.
Okay, I'll just go ahead and share that then.
That's fine. Thanks.
Can everybody see that?
Mm-hmm.
Great.
All right. So in these first, let me zoom out. I don't think there were any comments in these first several lines down to manufactured home, which is row 12. Were there any additional comments that any commissioners had that we'd like to specifically look at regarding the specific standards for those uses? All right. If not, let's move on to manufactured home community. And this is where that topic of tiny homes came up. Let's see here. Kevin and Josie, I believe you had some comments as well around this, Bob. So let's just go round robin on these and call out any thoughts here of how we might want to maybe address or look at some of the issues that we've called out, and then we can prioritize those and bring those into future conversations if we need to.
Ela, can you move the screen over so that we can see the comments? We know the topic.
Yes, we are going to lose some of the.
No, I'm just saying,
Yeah.
move on
Is
the
that
bar on
good?
the bottom. If you can move to the right, there you go. Thank you.
I just don't want to go too far, then we'll lose what we're talking about. Is that, yeah, that's not every, well, that's almost
No.
everybody.
We're talking about manufactured home community. So I think we can probably all remember that.
Okay, so that's the first line that we have comments.
Thank you.
Oh, if
Okay.
somebody is in the document and moving around, that's going to jump my screen around
Nope,
apparently.
you're good. I just put a freeze on those first two columns. So you can
Okay, cool. That's what I was going to go do that as well.
All right. Okay, so so here are some of the comments that were noted in the doc related to manufactured home community. First of all, we've had this question of tiny homes come up a few times, both as a one potential solution around affordable housing, but also as something that people may opt into regardless of their ability to pay for different types of housing in the community, because they tend to be more sustainable options to single family home use and development. And I also just called out that in the specific standards, the use specific standards, we use this term attractive, and we don't define what attractive means. And I think it might be something that we want to add to the glossary of the land use code, so that we are defining it not based off of individual preferences or some arbitrary preference, but it actually has a actionable definition to it. So Kevin, I saw that you had some comments on tiny home communities as well. Did you want to touch on that?
My only comment was agreeing with your comments, so no new content there. But I do think that this, as was pointed out in Citizens Be Heard, there are a lot of technicalities to this issue, and I doubt we're going to resolve it today. So maybe we could just flag some items we'd like to see in the future to help with this. And one of those might be if there are other communities, Josie mentioned Telluride, that have tackled this issue, maybe we could just, take what they have done as a starting point. So.
What I'd like to see is have it potentially get it out of the conditional use and make it a permitted use, and potentially have an overlay that could be applied within a certain geographical area within the county. And as far as what we're talking about here are tiny homes that are small, but they're not park model homes. They are, they meet all the Universal Building Code standards. They just happen to be very small, potentially less than 450 feet or so. So I think that addresses the issue that Reed brought up. We're not talking about little park model homes. We're talking about real stick-built homes built on site, but they're small, on small lots, kind of jammed into an area. So when we develop the standards for those, we need to be looking at all the different characterizations of lot densities, including side yards, backyards, front yards, parking. All those considerations need to go into it. The idea is we could probably have meet most of the setback requirements and parking requirements on a smaller lot if the house footprint itself were smaller. So those are my thoughts. I think we've talked about tiny homes a lot, and there seems to be general agreement that this is another way of providing affordability. But we've been so busy, we have kind of like put it on the back burner, and it maybe has to stay on the back burner for a while longer. But those are my thoughts about, let's make it a permitted use rather than conditional use. It would be a community, not just one tiny home, and try to figure out the right places within the county to allow them. Thank you.
And my comment, it probably in part reflects Garish's, although I hadn't thought it out very well. I think it would be nice for it to be a permitted use, and it's why my very little comment said, oh, what about multifamily residential as the place for it? But an overlay might be better. I haven't thought of all the implications of what I said, but it would be nice if there were some areas where it was a permitted use. It might actually happen then.
This is Brian, and my comment is that we need to, if we're going to have tiny homes, I'm for tiny homes, but right now the zoning in basically all the zones we have in the county will not permit multiple lots. Highway commercial is 18 units per acre, and in order to have a tiny home village or a tiny home community, we need a higher density than 18 units per acre, in my opinion.
So given the general interest in this, I think we pull out this question of tiny homes as its own future agenda topic. Maybe wait until the new county commission sits. And I know there's been some concern from other county commissioners and expressed by a few planning commissioners around the build out of the existing high density overlay accommodations and so on. So I do think, Mila, let's just tag that as a future item to come back to generally and not try to solve through this process. And I'd love to just touch on then on this use standards. Josie raised a additional item to the one that I raised around, see here, I5C. So let me open that. This is the landscaping and screening. So right now, I5C reads, exposed ground surfaces shall be protective with a vegetative growth that is capable of preventing soil erosion and of eliminating offensive dust. And so Josie, I see you recommending that, would you like to see xeriscaped uses as a possibility, or are you just concerned that it's implied and we should tighten up that language?
I think the latter. I think the language, I'm not looking at it directly, but the language was something like any exposed ground needs to have a certain kind of vegetation, and it talks only about vegetation. So that really was all I was talking about, is whether that also includes like a more mulch kind of a covering.
So I think as far as getting something valuable out of this discussion, let's just sort of get to a sense of general consensus around different changes. And then Mila, maybe ask you to come back with a consolidated list at our next meeting, and we can potentially figure out whether we want to move forward to some actual code changes addressing those. Does that sound right?
So another comment I have, this is Brian. We were talking about manufactured homes. Usually tiny homes are not manufactured homes, they're site built. And so, like I said, if we can come around and talk about it later, it'd be wonderful.
Great. Okay, so just to kind of bullet on this line before we move forward. So we have this general conversation about tiny homes, how we address them as communities, and there's interest in addressing them, but we're going to look at that separately. So we'll pull that out as a separate future item. Related to the specific use standards. So for that I5C, what is the interest from the commission in seeing us look at xeriscaped options as a way to offset erosion and dust problems as an alternative to vegetation cover? Is that something just kind of thumbs up we'd like to see happen, or maybe not as much? Okay, Bob, sorry, I can't see everyone very well from the, okay. Josie, Garish, okay, great. So Mila, let's add that onto the list of things to come back to. And then.
There's another issue, Emily, there's another issue, and that is currently it's a conditional use. And I think Josie picked up on one item, as far as alternative ways of landscaping or controlling dust. But I'd like to see manufactured home communities be the standards be explicit enough that rather than being a conditional use, that it be a permitted use, and probably in more of the residential areas than just highway commercial.
Mm-hmm.
And well, I mean, in SLR and HC, I think there's maybe some other opportunities within the county, within the different zones, that a well-planned community meeting the standards that we have would be good to have, rather than question whether, as a conditional use, whether it would be allowed or not. So that's just my idea. I don't know if other commissioners feel the same way or not.
Garish, earlier I may have misunderstood you when you were saying you'd like to see potentially an overlay. Was that related to your thoughts around tiny homes, or in general, manufactured home communities either being a permitted use or having an overlay applied?
Well, I think tiny homes, as I said and Brian said, are not manufactured homes. So we need a new category
Yeah.
for tiny homes.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood your earlier comment. So you weren't expressing an interest to see a manufactured home community have a overlay.
I was thinking a manufactured home community being a permitted use rather than conditional use.
All right, I understood you correctly then. Thank you.
And I agree with Gary, Sarah. We need some more zones to put manufactured home communities in. Right now it's a conditional use and only 2. Maybe we should have a few more.
So quick straw poll, who would like to see manufactured homes be a permitted use, at least in the zones where they are currently conditional? Okay. And again, straw poll, not binding. We're just trying to, so I saw 4 hands.
But Emily,
Yes?
I think that, that was conditional with improving what the description looks like. The only other thing I'd say is it does help with the problem that I think we really have for affordable housing, which is affordable housing for people who can't afford to go into houses, regular houses. So it would be nice if it could be permitted somewhere.
All right. So what I'd love to get out of this conversation is just some general direction back to staff to be able to come back with recommendations on specific changes that we could agree or not agree on to recommend to the county commission. So let's just, staying on the slide item, let's pull this out a little bit. So it sounds like there is generally some majority consensus to see manufactured homes as a permitted use and not a conditional use, contingent on those use standards being very specific and tightened up, and that maybe there's also some interest in expanding that use across additional underlying zones.
I just wanted to ask a clarifying question. So typically manufactured home communities have a pretty high density and denser than is normally allowed in, for example, SLR, I think. So were people intending to allow manufactured home communities as a permitted use, but keeping the density of the existing zones, or increasing the density? This wasn't clear to me what the intent was.
Well, in order to have a community, you have to increase the density somehow, because right now, if you only have 1 manufactured home per acre and you wanted 50 homes, you have to have 50 acres, So we would have to increase the density somehow in the areas where we want the manufactured home community.
Yeah, Kevin, I think that's a good
I guess I'm surprised. Excuse me. Go ahead.
Kevin, I think that's a good catch, and maybe we ought to look at what's the best way to permit it as a high density mobile manufactured home community. And even though I was answered Emily in the negative as far as an overlay pertinent to manufactured home communities, maybe that's what we need to look at. I don't know, but I think it deserves some more discussion.
Well, currently the density for manufactured home communities, the maximum density is 8 dwelling units per gross acre. And Mila, maybe you could speak to this, given that it's conditional in small lot residential. How does that math work? Is that seems overly dense to the underlying zone?
I believe that 8 per acre is our small lot residential density.
Is it that dense? Okay.
So it's the same.
And is that that would be including ADUs?
I'm not sure, since we haven't had any recent applications for manufactured home communities, I'm not fully versed in their requirements, but I'm not sure that they would be have ADUs. I certainly haven't seen that before, manufactured home communities with any kind of ADUs, but I don't think that our code would not permit that. in SLR, there's 8 per acre, and that includes an ADU, or that is in addition to an ADU for each
That was
lot.
my question. In
Yeah.
addition. Given that there hasn't been a lot of interest in this so far, and given the high density overlay and the interest in exploring tiny home communities, I think how I might ask the commission if they'd be comfortable moving forward on this is if we address any outstanding issues in the land use standards as it's currently placed that we might like to see enhanced or rewritten or added. Consider a recommendation towards making these permitted uses in their existing zones subject to these questions around density, but not spending too much time here, given the fact that from just anecdotally, what I've heard inside of the county is that there is some interest maybe in tiny home communities, which people may think of as differently from manufactured home communities. And we may want to get some public input on that sometime later winter, early spring, specific to maybe a broader definition of what we mean when we're talking about these communities.
And can I just add that from a technical standpoint, we actually just had a discussion with the building department about our manufactured home standards. They are a specific thing. They do not include just anything kind of smaller. They are actually HUD standards for what's called a manufactured home. So, and that's also not a what are they called? A modular home, like one of those that's built in a factory and then brought on site can actually be, considered a single family dwelling, whereas a manufactured home has different standards. So these are a very specific type of building that is defined by federal standards. What I will say is that in conversation with the building department, it does seem like our manufactured home standards, that 3.2.1H, are currently not being particularly enforced. They are written in a way that it seems to discourage any type of manufactured home. Going over them with the building department, it seemed like a lot of the requirements were almost impossible for most manufactured homes to meet. And so the building department has generally kind of, let that go so that people can actually, be able to find manufactured homes that they can afford and that they can live in. There are a lot of aesthetic standards, mostly is what's in there right now. So, and also some foundation standards, I guess, that don't actually make any sense. So we've gone over that, and we have a red line version of that part of the code that we are planning to go through again together and then present to the Planning Commission as a possible land use code amendment. So if you'd like to see that, in the meantime, once we should be done working on that in about a week. So just FYI.
For the sake of moving on, does everyone feel comfortable passing this for now until we have that updated recommendation from the building department and from planning staff? Okay. That being said, generally speaking, I think it would be really great for us to come back around to this topic around tiny homes as well. So as you're reviewing the rest of this table in the coming weeks, if you do see specific things you'd like to see addressed in those land use standards, or that you would be more comfortable with it being in place in order to consider some changes to these underlying zones, let's just make sure to get those captured in the table and we can come back to those. All right, so let's move down to we're upper story residential. There was no comments. All other household uses. Josie points out that in general, we're using this term all other and not clarifying it. Do we have examples of these other uses, and would it make sense to actually call them out as line items in the code?
Can somebody give some examples of what other is?
We do, yeah. So if you, I don't know if I can actually get, sorry, the Zoom, drop down thing keeps getting in my way. I hopefully can show you if I can find, did the screen share change just now?
You're on the land use code now.
Okay, great. So I was gonna show you this right here. we have residential use categories. So this is where we would determine other uses. So this is in our section, what is this, 3.4. And you can see here, so these are under the examples. That's where we would find uses that are allowed that aren't necessarily specifically pointed out in the land use code in the use table above, as well as accessory uses. So that's most of the time where we would go to define those other uses.
So just to clarify, if there's a use that's not listed in this table, 347, not listed in any of the 3 columns, is it permitted or not?
No. Yeah, this is where we would go to define other uses that would be allowed or not allowed. And ideally, and so far it's been pretty much true, but ideally everything that would, that would probably fall roughly into a category that's either in examples or in uses not included or in accessory uses. So these tables are fairly detailed so far. And if there's something missing, then, we would do some research to see where it fit. But for the most part, we can find what we need in here.
So to clarify,
with,
I'm sorry, Kevin, to clarify, the uses not included are what we are talking about as other.
Well, no. So when we're talking about other uses that are other, whatever it was, that would be in here in the example. So that's the permitted things in the other. So we have, group homes and single family structures, or these ones down at the bottom are the ones that don't show up as just line items in the code for the most part.
Okay, so one option would just to make that clear, because when this column is labeled examples, usually in legal writing that means non-exclusive examples, like there could be other examples and these are just some of them. So I think someone who wasn't familiar with the traditions of Grand County Code interpretation I think all other could be taken more literally. So it seems like one option would just be to make that clear, so that people like me and Josie, when we read this, that would be obvious to us what was intended by all other uses. And another would be to put everything as a line item.
Yeah, so just put C 3.47, to see all other uses, and just refer it back to that.
And it does actually have a link to 3.4.7 right up here.
I think clarity is always better. If we just, even in that table, specified which of these are other uses. It just looks like, and we're about to go through this exercise after this item, there's just some general cleanup that could probably happen. It looks like some of our language could be a little bit more inclusive as well in land use code. So we might just want to look at that administratively. Josie, does that answer your questions from rows 15 and 17 regarding other uses, or did you want to see anything added or subtracted from that list? Or Kevin, I know you.
I couldn't find the mute button, the unmute button. I have so many windows up. Yeah, I think that answers it, and kind of also, like, my question was similar to Kevin's, just around language of what could theoretically be included in that definition of other. So yeah, I agree. Just maybe linked directly in those rows to that information, so that it feels like an inclusive set of possibilities and not an open-ended set.
All right. So before we leave this, we hopefully want to get through this and sort of not have to circle back to it. So just to revisit, gosh, that's a lot of jargon I'm using. I apologize. It's Monday after work. Just to sort of revisit this list of what we came up with. So one is getting an update from the building department, the conversations they've been having with planning staff related to manufacturing homes and the use standards there. Revisit more generally this question of tiny home communities and whether or not that would make sense collapsing into manufacturing homes or into multifamily residential or some other categorization in of itself. And recognizing that that might not be a top priority, but it's definitely something we want to come back to as a body to look at. That there's just some general clarity and cleanup that we'd like to see in these tables, specifically being clear about when we say other uses, where you go to find that information and what is included in that list, and making it clear that that is a exclusive list and not, or an inclusive list of what is listed and not just a set of examples from which it's not a closed universe of options. And then finally, around these general standards specific to manufactured homes, but I think maybe something we should look at more generally is, one, when we use the word attractive in our code, do we define that effectively? Is that clear and actionable? And two, when we're talking about ground covering, do we offer xeric options beyond vegetative uses, especially where we might be talking about large areas? Did I capture all those bullets? Anything outstanding? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move us forward then, unless there's anyone who wants to shout something out. Let's talk through public and civic uses and try and get through that before moving forward. Okay, so looking first at community service, all community service. Curious why this isn't permitted in all residential zones. And we do have a conditional use in range and grazing there. So Mila, is there a reason why this wouldn't be included in other residential zones?
I don't know what the community service refers to, so I'd have to look at the land use code table to see.
Okay.
I guess that would be like a food bank or something. I'm not really sure what a community service.
Examples are libraries, museums, philanthropic institutions, senior centers, social service facilities, and youth club facilities. Those are the examples, not the accessory uses or uses not included. I'm honestly surprised that those are permitted in residential areas. I guess the youth club facilities, I know like the Girl Scout house inside the city is in a residential area. But is this something that would make sense in residential areas moving forward?
I think community service is actually the problem, is the title. That doesn't make a lot of sense. This is more like educational and nonprofit facilities.
Right, because it seems like, I mean, libraries and community centers are often in residential neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm.
So is there a suggestion you'd like to make, Josie, as far as what we would possibly do instead?
I mean, is this like, is it a blunt tool to use to have like that whole list? Because I mean, I don't see why like a library branch per se wouldn't be basically in any residential type of zone. So, you know, I don't know if other things are in that list are what's keeping that as permitted, you know, if things need to be dissected out, because otherwise I would just say, let's permit it in all of the other zones, including range and grazing.
Yeah, what's the, I mean, like on the one hand, I don't know that we want to go too in the weeds with this, but it seems like now is as good a time as any to recommend some updates to clean up the code and make it more clear. Like I'm confused by the fact that under government facilities, we have detention center and recycling center, but we wouldn't have library. It seems like there's some categorizations here that just maybe need to be pulled out as their own line items, given the fact that we're likely to see continued, you know, growth and development in areas of the county where there aren't library branches, and there may well be sometime in the future, versus trying to define all community service and leaving it a bit open. Because I agree with you that it makes sense to you know, as much as the code is a signaling tool and a communication tool for future development, as much as it is a way to regulate existing development, it seems like that's something that would be beneficial to the county and its citizens in general. Okay, well, with that in mind, again, I'm going to try and keep us moving forward, but I think let's pull out a point here then that let's come back to all community service and consider pulling those out as individual line items. Is there general consensus that that makes sense? That would be things like libraries, museums. What else was included in that list? Philanthropic institutions, youth club facilities. I know it's riveting. Yes, yes, generally, or no.
So all we're leaving is community centers and senior centers. And,
I'm suggesting we make some suggestions back to staff for what we'd like to see pulled out, if we would like to see something pulled out.
because I mean, there could be under either one, but I mean, if you pull all those out, you just have the senior centers and community centers left in there. So maybe combined somehow.
I just wanted to make a comment about, about the meaning of all other again. It seems to be in these tables that we're looking at, there's this top box that says characteristics, and that's the definition of, of community service or, whatever it is we're talking about. And it seems that as written, the examples are just meant to be examples. They're not meant to be a list of, if you're not on this list, you're not that. So, so on the one hand, this all other, does get defined, but I think the definition is in the characteristics box, not the examples box in these tables.
Is that different from what we just discussed as far as the other category?
Well, I thought previously we were saying that, there's this first column of these tables and it says examples. And if your thing is not in that list, then that means it's not allowed. And I guess what I'm saying is I was a lawyer looking at this code, I would say, no, you look at the box above that, that's labeled characteristics. And if your proposed use meets all those characteristics, then it's allowed, if it's a permitted use there, whether or not it's in the examples list. So if we want, so I just think this needs to be written if we want the examples to be a full list of all possible examples.
I tend to agree with you, Kevin, because I mean, the example, there could be 2 or 3 other things that meet the criterion of the characteristics and is not in the list.
Yeah.
So this question of other has come up for uses that are slightly more impactful than community service as it relates specifically to noise, pollution, so on, quality of life for residents. Mila, I think this is one that it would be useful to get the county attorney's opinion on. I know that she is very busy right now, and this is certainly not pressing. But before we start to divide any of this up, let's just get an opinion from her about whether or not, how she interprets this being written, and direction on what we might do if we'd like to be clear about excluding uses from this other uses, other than just uses not included.
So when we've had discussions about these things in the past, it's true that the example side is a lot more inclusive and rather not exclusive. However, the uses not included is specifically exclusive. So if anything falls under that category, it's specifically disallowed. So that's how these use category descriptions have worked between all of our offices as staff. So if there were anything that we wanted to, specifically not include and add to that uses not included, that would probably be the best way to go. As Kevin said, we can potentially include something that does still meet the intent or the characteristics of each category, regardless of if it's on the examples list. And that's, I think, why these boxes are written like that. It's not uses included and then accessory uses and then uses not included. It's just examples, which means we can add to that list. Accessory uses, which those don't have any extra that we operate with. But then uses not included is specifically disallowed. And that's definitely something that is very specific. So if there were things we don't want to include, I would highly suggest adding them to the uses not included part of that table.
Okay.
So maybe I could suggest a different homework problem for us rather than for the county attorney. Now that Mila's pointed out these tables and how they help define what this all other uses things mean. I mean, maybe we should go through and see if we think this all other category, each one, whether we think it's too inclusive or not, or whether there might be in some unintended thing. And then we could repair it by adding something to the uses not included, for example.
I think that's a great idea. All right. Is everyone comfortable moving on to college or university? Or is there any other comments on this? Okay, so Kevin and Garish both concurred that they don't believe college or university should be included in residential, even as a conditional use. I tend to agree with that. Just quick straw poll, that's 3 of the body. Would anyone else like to see this struck as a conditional use inside of residential areas? Okay. Josie, Brian's maybe on the fence. Rachel, hi. All right, that's consensus. So let's, Mila, included in any roll up of recommendations that we make, striking college or university as conditional from residential. And I'm sorry, everyone, to freight train us through. I just want to make sure that we're able to sort of run through this. So please stop at any time. But let's move on to field research stations and environmental education centers. This one, it looks like maybe there is some agreement about adding it to other zones. Garish, do you want to speak to that?
Well,
Oh, go ahead.
yeah, we've been talking about the discussion about environmental education centers got popped up when we started looking at the small area plan for 313. And I don't know why field research stations and environmental education centers would not be a permitted use if the standards were met in all non-residential areas. So I would recommend too that they be permitted use in range and grazing. I don't know why those types of facilities would be inappropriate in non-residential zones. So maybe I'm just missing something.
I think there was one issue was whether or not they were going to allow overnight accommodations. And I don't know if that would really matter in the other zones. I guess not. But possibly because it's not allowed in some of those non-residential zones.
Mm-hmm. Rachel, what would be your thoughts on range and grazing? Making it permitted?
Yeah, I would say permitted, and it seemed like that's what we were talking about in the small area plan. But again, we were trying to work out the details with the, the overnight facilities and how many people could stay there, that kind of thing. There was a little bit, I feel like we were a little divided on that, but
mm-hmm.
Yeah, I got the sense that most people were okay with it being permitted in that zone.
I'm not so sure. I mean, quite a lot of the county is zoned range and grazing, and a lot of this is very remote areas pretty far. And so I think it just gives us one extra little safety layer to make it conditional rather than permitted. Because when we think of range and grazing, maybe we're thinking of some land immediately adjacent to 191, but it's most of the county, including very remote areas, where putting in one of these things would be a very big change. And since I don't think we've thought through the implications of putting an environmental education center on the full range of all the range and grazing land, I think, to me, a conditional use seems more appropriate.
Mila, what were next steps from that coming up in our meeting 2 weeks ago related to field research stations having some component in the overnight accommodations as its own separate overnight accommodations use?
Yeah, so we are going to prepare some suggested standards or potential guidelines for that, and then bring them back to you guys.
So when you bring that back, I think coming back with staff's recommendation on underlying zone permissibility as well would be great to kind of make sure that we're including our thoughts here.
We'll make sure to add that in. That's great. That's a great point.
All right.
And so Mila, just to check, I mean, so once those standards that you just referred to are done, if we did put a P beside Environmental Education Center in this table, that we would be granting a use by right only to the non-overnight accommodation
Yes.
aspects. And if they wanted in addition to have overnight, then they would apply just like everybody else, except they'd have their own special category.
Yep. That's what I would envision. Yeah. And we can make sure to make that clear. So anything that was permitted here would not include the overnight accommodations component or, possible component of an environmental ed center.
And I'm thinking I actually do want to kind of look at the map again and see where the range and grazing is. I know that when the I felt a little bit taken by surprise when the Night Skies kind of education center was getting put in, because that was sort of like as was mentioned, that was kind of out in the middle of nowhere, and I certainly also maybe don't want to see little pockets of development kind of higgly-piggly everywhere.
All right. So we're going to come back to that. So let's just touch on this, all other educational facilities, and then just do kind of a gut check on where things sit. So Kevin, I think your point is spot on, that it's surprising that so many of these uses that are defined would be conditional, and then we would make all other educational facilities permitted in residential zones. So right off the bat, my thought there was set a standard and stick with it. If we do want to, consider it, at least make them conditional. But what were your thoughts there, and what recommendations might you make as a kind of starting point for discussion?
Well, I guess I would want, I think Mila has reminded me at least that these all other categories are a little bit more specific than what one imagines just reading the table. And so I guess I'd want to look carefully at this, but I do think in general, residential zones should be mostly residential, and I think any sort of non-residential use in a residential zone, it makes me nervous, and if it isn't there, maybe it should be a conditional use rather than a permitted use. But I haven't had a chance to look at this table and see just what kinds of things are happening under the all other category in this case. Like a seminary is probably one thing. A seminary can be like a really big thing with a lot, if it's a popular seminary, that could be a large thing with lots of parking. So that's an example of something which I think shouldn't be an automatically permitted use in a residential zone. And military academies there as well. I mean, again, that could be like a rather large thing with a lot of daily traffic. So
I have a tendency to agree with you. We have too many things in the residential zone right now in Moab, and that's part of our issue. Over the past years, we've allowed many things to encroach in the residential zones in the community. And so when you drive out in the valley, you see multiple things, and you don't know which zone it is really, because there's so many different things in the valley,
All right, so let's just tie this one up then. Generally speaking, as our homework, as we continue to work through this, going through and looking at those use tables at the large sort of bucket use levels, such as public and civic uses, and looking at what's currently marked as not, what is the definition? Not a use?
Use is not included.
Use is not included, thank you. And calling out anything that we do think there. In general though, I'm curious just to get overall appetite for removing specifically all other educational facilities as a permitted use, and looking at use specific standards in areas such as traffic, noise. You could imagine a additional charter school potentially being categorized under all other educational facilities in areas of the county. And I think it's probably worth considering how we want to define our residential areas, or how we'd recommend to the county council based off of what we've heard from citizen input, how we would recommend defining residential uses in a way that's slightly more stringent. So just show of hands on appetite for removing permitted uses for all other educational facilities in residential and moving to conditional with more strict standards. I see Kevin, I see Brian, I see Josie Garish, I see Bob and Rachel, I think. I lost. Oh, there you are, Rachel. Okay. So that gets us to just after 5. Let's draw the line there. Depending on how far we get through the meeting, you know, I think if we can do 1.5 of these chunks, we're making really good time. Just to play back then to make sure we all know what comes next. So the goal here is to, 1, make sure that our use standards are sufficient and aligned to the actual uses and actual impact of these different uses. That 2, we are being consistent with how we are applying uses to underlying zones, not just based off of what has happened in the past, but based off of the amount of input we've gotten around similar applications and similar interests from the community. Just to get some clarity in general around these uses. So homework, go into that use table, look at what is a non-permitted use right now. If there's anything you'd like to see added, if there's anything you'd like to see removed from that list and maybe put in as a conditional use, let's just go through and call that out. More granularly, excuse me, tiny homes communities, we're going to come back to xeric uses as a ground cover, and then the specific issues we called out, such as removing some of these permitted uses or adding some conditional uses that Mila captured.
And I would like to add some permitted uses in some of the commercial zones in some of the last categories we just reviewed. So.
Awesome. Okay. So I know that we just ran through this as a group, but if you all could just jot down some notes and send an email to staff with any additional thoughts, and then we'll just kind of keep this a rolling ball. So any additional comments that we collect as a body, we'll put into our next packet. What we'd like to do is leave this exercise over the next few meetings with specific recommendations that we'd like to address in public hearing, or specific items that we want to call out for future exploration as a body, but are not a priority now, like that tiny homes question. And then finally, we have these sort of like, oh, we already have work in progress, such as the work that the building department is doing with planning staff. Anything I'm leaving on the table? All right, I know this isn't the really exciting part of planning, but I think it's nice that we're coming back to this and putting a bow on it, hopefully putting us in a good position as we look forward to what will hopefully be some general plan work coming up in the next year or two. So, all right, let's do this then, since our meeting was a little bit funky. If you are on the YouTube link and you are wanting to make a citizen comment, you can find the updated Zoom information in the Agenda Center on the county website. But I will read out one last time the meeting ID and the passcode if you'd like to join for citizens to be heard. The meeting ID, the updated meeting ID to join is 854-7258-6014, passcode 178954. I see some people have joined us. If you'd like to make a comment for citizens to be heard, could you just put a comment in the chat, and then we'll call you in order that you raise your hand.
And just to be clear, I mean, these are comments that don't have anything to do with the public hearings, right?
Thank you, Kevin. Yes, that's a great clarification. So we are going to have two public hearings in just a moment, but this is anything that is not on the agenda you'd like to make a comment about. All right. So let's go ahead and move forward. If you join and I've missed you, just put something in the chat and we will come back.
Only
to
Mark Horowitz has raised his hand there.
Oh, Mark, I'm sorry. I
my hand.
didn't see you. Welcome, Mark. Would you like to make a comment?
It's been a real
something that
struggle. I spent nearly 40 minutes. I spent nearly 40 minutes trying to get into the Zoom room this evening. Thank you to those who helped.
Mark, I'm so sorry. Is it just me or is his internet?
I'm Rick. To finally address the status of Grant County's B&Bs made non-compliant. I'm sorry, what?
Your internet went out there for a second. It may be more stable now. Would you mind? We heard your comment that it took you a while to get in. Would you mind restarting your comment that you wanted to make?
Okay. Yes, thank you very much. Would you start with it? May I ask, can you hear me okay now? Yes, you hear me okay? All right. I anxiously watched the P&Z Zoom meeting about a month ago as you finally addressed the status of Grand County B&Bs made non-compliant some time ago. I've long awaited that day. I was deeply moved to hear the testimony from no less than 10 of my compatriots tell their stories of many years home hosting, some for as many as 20 years, about how no one in their neighborhood knew that they were there, how some of their visitors are now lifelong friends, or how many have invested thousands into their properties for years. We then heard from Elaine Gisler explain that the local owned homestay B&Bs are an important part of the resort community's lodging industry, that they are a sought after experience for the economic generator and a sort of economic diversity, an opportunity for local entrepreneurs that puts money directly into local hands, which more directly benefits the community. Grand County's planning professional, Ms. Dunbar, explained a couple of simple options, including simply overlaying the OAO over existing licensed long-time owner-operated B&Bs, or simply making B&Bs a conditional use with restrictions, strict restrictions. She says it's bad planning to have a lot of non-compliant uses, that non-compliant status are usually left for uses that you want to go away. The county attorney weighed in explaining these two simple options and then elaborated on a hopelessly complicated Castle Valley model, not even considering Moab City's current discussions on the matter. There was one brilliant moment of open-minded comment from Josie Kovash, who said, among other things, that there needs to be a distinction made between legitimate B&Bs from the proliferate. That home hosting, she said, is an opportunity, especially for young families and single mothers. And in fact, she said all those other unlicensed rentals should be occupied B&Bs. The obvious failure is your fear of new B&Bs and your failure to discern the difference between owner-occupied home lodgings and proliferation of unsupervised overnight rentals. We have one next door to us, which rents to 20 people a night on a quarter-acre lot. It's licensed to that. Strictly derailed, as Ms. Nielsen said that she was fine if we went away, if we were terminated, she said, and described us as a mistake. Mr. Willis then suggested that our motivation was for windfall profits and we're just another lodging for tourists that are ruining Moab. His bias, their bias, was obvious. The chair calls for a straw poll vote, a procedure, by the way, prohibited under Robert's rules. That vote fails a majority, and Mr. Willis raises his hand to object that the poll question was not more definitive and demands a rewording to ensure to the end of the discussion. I suggest you consider that when you discuss approving minutes of this meeting. Did you approve the minutes as I see them last week? Your minutes say Walker, Campbell, Nielsen, and Willis support postponing the discussion to the future date. That's not what I see when I watch that meeting over and over. There was then no 5 o'clock P&Z citizens to be heard that night, and I anxiously awaited the following week's county council meeting to hear the council liaisons report. There was none, I presume because Ms. Hawks was gagged by the county attorney from discussing the B&B issue. Then Ms. McGann also skipped the 6 o'clock citizen to be heard meeting. So that's my observations of the meeting. I did not like the way Mr. Willis berated the chair, all due respect. And I'm angry and frustrated at the way it went down. That's my comment for tonight.
Thank you for your comments. Did anybody else want to make comments as part of citizens to be heard? And Michael Scarda, I see a comment you've just placed in the chat. I don't know if you want to speak. You're welcome to come off of mute and make a citizens to be heard comment if you'd like.
Yeah, thank you. So I went ahead and copied some stuff in the link. You guys were talking about manufactured homes. I've done some research into that area, and Manufactured homes are often discounted because financing can be very difficult. If you look at a manufactured home lot has a maximum of 69,000. Manufactured home has a maximum of 23,000. And so the most you can get on a typical loan for a manufactured home and lot is 92,000, and that doesn't cover most things. And part of that is that a lot of manufactured homes have traditionally been almost disposable. And so anyway, if you're looking at zoning, perhaps a good medium would be to do something that the home has to qualify for manufactured home advantage. And so that's a Fannie Mae financing where they can, if you have a porch and you have a sidewalk and a driveway and a garage, anyway, it's a point system that puts manufactured homes more on a permanent level. There's really not a lot of difference between how they're made in some ways. It gets at a higher level, and then once you have that, you can qualify for the manufactured home gets a certification number, and it can qualify for any loan that a regular home can get. So I mean, up in, I believe the $700,000 range is what it qualifies for. And the benefit to Grand County of not applying this to old homes necessarily. I mean, they're grandfathered in. I would say don't do that to them. But new construction may be worthwhile going ahead and implementing this, because people can get loans for it, and it's advantageous. They'll be able to get a loan for 3% versus 7%. Anyway, I perhaps will chime in later, but that's just input on the manufactured homes.
Thank you for your comments. All right. Since I see nobody else raising their hand and nobody else waiting to chat, we will move on. If you find that you wanted to make a comment that doesn't come up in, that isn't relevant to one of the public hearings you'd like to speak later, of course, we will always entertain that. I'm going to ask if a commissioner would be willing to make an, to relocate our second action item down to after the public hearing, since we're 20 minutes after that 5 o'clock hour, and then we would come back to it after the second public hearing of the night. Would somebody be willing to make that motion? Okay, Garish makes the motion. Is there a second? Bob seconds. All right, so our second action item, looking at the All-American Acres Lot 5 subdivision, we will move to after our second public hearing, and that way we'll stay on track for the scheduled public hearings, beginning with land use code amendments, retail and highway, commercial, and camping. So because this is a public hearing, this is more of a related to administrative maneuvering and not a specific land use application. We won't have a applicant here. Mila, I think you froze, and I'm always afraid it's my internet. Okay. So what we'll do here is we'll invite staff to make a report, then we'll move straight into conversation. What we'll try and do with our public hearings, both of them, is if anybody has a comment around whether or not they would vote for it, we are going to ask that we get a motion on the table first, so that we are discussing the specific merits of the application or the specific merits of the change or small area plan, et cetera, after a motion is on the table. But if you have questions for staff, we'll put that ahead of time. It's just, we'll run these all consistently. And Garish just chimed a really quick question about ex parte disclosures. We did already do that. So if you were joining late, there were no ex parte disclosures, no disclosures on the table. But for any commissioners who joined late, did you have any ex parte communications or disclosures you wanted to share? Okay, so let's go ahead and move forward to the staff report on the land use code amendments related to retail and highway, commercial, and camping.
Okay. Sorry about that. My Wi-Fi just ducked out for a second. So this is recommended via conversations between the county attorney's office and staff. We initiated these changes largely in response to issues that arose across both of our desks. Some of the changes are very small. For instance, we are changing community and economic development director to community development director. So because economic development has gone to the travel council, small administrative changes. And then some of them are a little bit more substantive. One being we have, as we had discussed previously, modified the use table and the residential use categories to allow highway commercial, or sorry, to allow all other retail and wholesale trade in the highway commercial zone. In addition, we changed the definition or added the definition of camping to be a lot more specific. We've had a number of complaints from neighbors asking about code enforcement for their neighbors who are, living in RVs or other, temporary substandard structures. We didn't have anything particularly specific in our code to address that, and now we will after this. So I can go through the changes one by one, or if you have had a chance to review all of the red lines, then we can just talk about it, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Did everyone have a chance to review the red lines in the packet? All right, so are there any questions for staff? Or concerns about those changes?
I think
wonder if
Mila may have
yes.
already answered. So, Garish freezing? I don't know, I can't tell.
No,
Is it me?
It was you.
This is a fun internet day.
That's all
Am I
right.
still frozen?
No, you're good. Garish, you go first, and then Kevin.
Okay. So there are some campgrounds that are not RV travel trailer type parks. Do we have a definition of that and need one?
Do you mean the alternate definition that's proposed here? It doesn't include non-RV camping? I thought we had gone through that.
Well, it looks like there's a it looks like there's a distinction between RV parks and other campgrounds.
Yeah, so if you look down in the red lines, what we did is add the definition of a campground to mean a public area designated by a public agency for camping, or a private area licensed by Grand County for camping, whether by tent, recreational vehicle, camper, or travel trailer.
And then I guess I'm confused as why we need the recreational vehicle travel trailer definition and a recreational vehicle travel trailer park definition. If
so
it's all included in camping.
So we're just adding the definition of campground, and we're adding the definition of camping. Those two definitions were not in the land use code before. So we're making that more clear. So, RV park is specific, and that's what was in the land use code. We didn't have these two terms in here at all. That's why they're entirely in red.
Okay,
They're just
I understand.
added.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. That should have been more clear.
Kevin?
I think my question was already answered by Mila. I just wanted to make sure there wasn't anything being changed here that I didn't notice, but I think Mila listed everything, so I'm fine.
And this is minor, but when I looked at the definition of camping, it doesn't seem to include someone sleeping outside without a tent or some kind of covering. And I don't know if that could be covered. It's a funny sort of thing, but my Mary and I often won't put up a tent, because we'd rather sleep under the stars. So I don't know if that needs to be changed or not.
So That's a good question. The purpose of this addition was so that we would be able to prevent people from living in these kinds of situations, or from, having their friends come and stay in their giant RV bus with their generator, next to somebody else's bedroom window. And that would be considered camping. So the intent was specifically not to prohibit, your 10-year-old from camping out in the backyard. So, I think in terms of people that are just sleeping outside, it's certainly true. I also like to just sleep outside half the time. But since we are mostly intending to address issues that come up in residential areas with people around, I don't think that we felt it was necessary to specifically address people just sleeping outside. It's really more about an actual temporary living situation. And I think if we do have it in our code to prevent people from sleeping outside, that also gets into homelessness issues. And, we do have some organizations in town that can help those people, unsheltered people. So this is just more about temporary shelters rather than unsheltered.
So it needs to be reworded, because like if my grandkids come and want to sleep in my backyard in a tent, as the ordinance is worded right here, they cannot do it.
They can, because that would not be considered temporarily residing. They're not residing in that tent. They're residing in your house, but they're sleeping in that tent.
So I don't like the way it's worded right now.
Before we start recommending any modifications to this, I want to make sure we open up the public hearing. And then as part of the discussion over whether or not to make a recommendation in favor or not, we can suggest any changes and make motions to that end as a body. So hold on to that, Brian, because I also have some thoughts there. Any other questions for staff, just generally to understand the nature of this? Then we'll open up the public hearing to public comments, and then we'll discuss any recommended changes that we might entertain.
I have just a quick question. I'd have to look in the packet, but at some place on the camping issue, there was language around unpermitted temporary structures, and I'm wondering if there is such a thing as a permitted temporary structure.
Yeah, there are plenty of permitted temporary structures. I mean, that would be an RV in an RV park, for instance, or, a travel trailer in a mobile home park or something like that.
Okay.
All right. So I'm going to go ahead. It's 5:30. I'm going to open up the public hearing. If you are joined to make a comment on this public hearing, you can do so now by posting in the chat. We'll give this just a moment. If you are on the YouTube recording, you can find the updated Zoom information in the Agenda Center of the county website, which has the Zoom information to join. So we'll give this just a moment.
And just to add to that, Emily, real quick, is that the Zoom information to join on the county website is, if you look at the meeting, it says Planning Commission, and to the right, there's a little TV icon that says Media Link, and that is the link to the Zoom meeting. So you just click on that little TV icon. And I think we'll probably do that every time now. That seems like actually a good place to have that Zoom link.
Fantastic. Great innovations are made through errors. History of the world. All right, Reed Pendleton would like to make a comment. Reed, you're welcome to come off of mute if you would just state your full name for the record and then go ahead and make your comments.
Okay, my name is Reed Pendleton. Frankly, with like some of you, I was kind of confused on the wording of camping. I think there is a difference between camping and living. I do recognize we do have a problem in this county, both on public land and private property, where people are living in RVs or tents or other structures where maybe they shouldn't be. So I was confused whether this is, people that were, doing illegal overnight accommodations, or people that are parking in parking lots that are closed, like at Walker True Value. Like, to me, it just seemed a very broad definition. So I I too would like maybe some clarification on what that's trying to target. I know there's a lot of people in this county that have RV pads on their properties. Some of them rent them, some of them live on them. Not sure what's allowed in the county per se. I know down here in San Juan County, it's awful. Almost every house has somebody living behind it in an RV. But secondary to that, I guess I just wanted to make a quick comment on why there is a problem. And I think part of the reason there is a problem is because it's so expensive to live in this county that living in an RV is frankly the most affordable option that a lot of people have. I personally provide accommodations legally to, right now, I think I've got 16 people that live in RVs on my properties, in my campgrounds. So, and they range from, people that are general managers to construction workers. It's a very broad landscape. So the thing that I've seen that's maybe contributing to this is how difficult it is to build campgrounds, especially in the last few years. And at the same time, we've actually destroyed at least 3 long-term facilities that people could live at. The one at the Wyndham, where the Wyndham was built, was a trailer park that got leveled. Dowd Flats is almost completely gone, which was a long-term campground. And now Edge of the Desert trailer park is converting to nightly rentals. And I picked up a few of their residents that have been forced to be removed from there because they live there. So I think there is a problem. I'd like this clarified a lot better in the land use code. But I'd also like to know, how are we going to actually address this problem? Rather than just saying you can't do it, where are we going to have the discussions to actually, encourage people to build certain accommodations so that people can live here legally? Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Was there anybody else who'd like to make a comment related to this public hearing? Okay, with that, we'll close the public hearing and entertain a motion. And it's been a little while since we've had a public hearing. So you can make the motion. You don't have to make the opening motion as stated in the packet. If you'd like to suggest or have some discussions about changes to the motions, we can do that ahead of time. And then after a motion is on the table, any changes to the motion will need to be an amended motion. So, or amendment to the motion. So I know Brian Garish had some thoughts on changes they may like to see in the language. I had one thought, but Brian, why don't you now, could you re-summarize the change you said you'd like to see in the language?
I would like to see the definition of a camping be more specific to maybe long-term, or somehow take out like the overnight backyard family camping type thing. Right now the way it's worded is like it's saying that I can't have my grandkids camp in the backyard, basically. I mean, that's the way I read it right now, the wording of it. And so we need to tweak it to say somehow that the intent of it, I understand where Mila was saying about the intent of it, but it does not say that in the ordinance. I mean, it's more specific, I guess.
Okay. Kevin, did you want to comment on Brian's comment, or did you want to make it just separate thing? Because the Garish was going to make a comment after Brian.
Oh, I thought you were called for.
All right, Bob, would you mind muting really quick?
But OB, you might want to mute yourself. Hearing a lot of Mario, right?
So if my recommendation was, since there were already some comments about changing the language as stated in the packet, that we would just discuss that ahead of time versus making a motion and then having to amend the motion. So we could go it either way. I think it's just cleaner this way.
Well, but I think the advantage of making the motion first is then we can have votes on amendments for the changes rather than straw polls or something, which I guess it depends which one you prefer.
Okay, that sounds like a clean approach. Would you like to make a motion?
The packet to 4 county commission 1.7 through 1 311.
Keep going. You caught up with yourself. Your internet was going out. You're at 311. We're with you. Would someone else like to make the motion? Sorry, Kevin. Kevin, stop. Wait, your internet's bad. Sorry.
Okay, maybe someone else should.
Okay. Would someone else like to make the motion while Kevin's Wi-Fi catches up with him?
Yeah, I'll make the motion.
right.
I move to forward a favorable recommendation to the county commission to approve the proposed ordinance amending sections 1.7, 3.1, 0.1C, 3.1.1, 4.6.7A, 4.7.8A, 4.7.10, 9.1.3B, 9.1.3G, and 10.2 of the Grand County Land Use Code.
All right. Is there a second? Gary seconds. All right. Thank you. Kevin, sorry about that. It seems to be just kind of splotchy Wi-Fi in the county right now. All right. So Garish, did you had a comment as well? Did you want to recommend any amendments to that motion?
I just have a little discussion. You know, both the county sheriff and the city police have voiced concerns about the legality of enforcing a camping or overnight stays outside of legal campgrounds, etc. So I did a little research, and there have been a lot of camping ordinances or ordinances dealing or prohibiting camping that have been overturned because of discrimination, particularly when cases were brought by homeless advocates. So I think we need to be really careful about the definition that we are including in this, so that you know, it's enforceable and would meet the test of constitutionality. I also looked at a couple other definitions of camping from different places. And one thing that we don't have in ours, and this might be part of the problem with the homeless issue, is preparing a bed of some sort, not necessarily erecting a tent or driving a vehicle onto a location, but just preparing a bed to sleep overnight. So I don't know what the right answer is, but I'm just throwing out some caveats that we need to be really, really clear about our definition of what we are prohibiting, and then possibly ask the county attorney to look at this from a perspective of, you know, is it going to withstand a test? Not enforceable in a local court, but on a bigger scale, whether or not there'll be constitutional issues involved with the prohibition that we come up with. So right now I'm thinking that we could add more to the definition that would strengthen the ability of law enforcement to actually take action. But on the flip side, we may be boxing ourselves into an unconstitutional situation. So I'm just throwing that out as just a little perspective. I don't know what the correct answer is.
Emily, can I just make one comment? Just to clarify, this update and or this particular part of the update and all of the language was written by the county attorney's office. So
I realize that.
Okay, so she's certainly
she's just looking at it from an enforceability standpoint. There may be other issues, other implications that would run us into enforceable problems on a bigger scale than just, oh yeah, you're doing this, you're doing something that meets our definition of illegal camping, and therefore we're going to write you a citation. There may be other implications. So I don't know what the solution is, but I think we might want to ask her to look at this definition and the whole enforceability of illegal camping from a larger, broader perspective. That's all I'm saying.
And I think one of the issues we have is the river rafters. You know, there's probably thousands of river rafters that pull over and camp on a sandbar every year. You know, I mean, is that illegal camping? I mean, according to this definition, yes. I mean, and so how are you going to enforce that? So, and I think the enforcement issue is that will the police or is the county sheriff be willing to enforce things like this? I don't think they would be. So I don't like the way it's written right now.
Just to also clarify, this applies to private property in Grand County. So anything on the river is permitted, and people camping on the river would be in BLM campgrounds or camping areas, ideally.
So one change, Brian, to answer to your earlier concerns could be to add the phrasing of by a non-homeowner or non-property owner to that definition. So the act of vacationing or temporarily residing in a tent, or the act of vacationing or temporarily residing as a homeowner in a tent, vehicle, recreational vehicle, et cetera, or property owner instead of homeowner. I don't personally feel strongly about that. I don't know that it's necessary, but that could be one way to alleviate some of the concerns. And Garish, also to your point, to add a temporary bed to that list of items. I mean, I trust the county attorney to have done her diligence in this, but if there are recommendations you'd like to make, we can certainly entertain a motion to amend before we call the actual vote. Josie?
Yeah, I'd like to add some thoughts to Garish's point, not just thinking about the constitutionality, but thinking about sort of the substance of the argument behind it being potentially unconstitutional. And this feels like a much larger conversation to me, in that it has always been my personal belief that, for instance, with people living in their vehicles, that rather than be punishable for living in a vehicle, that they should be punishable for like violating some sort of law or ordinance outside of that, for instance, a noise ordinance or like a public urination law. I do think that there's a kind of slippery slope into sort of just criminalizing homelessness and or poverty, and beyond just river guides. I mean, I would say a pretty hefty portion of our workforce, especially our seasonal workforce at this point in time, lives out of their vehicles or in some similar situation. I myself have been in that category at points during my tenure in town here. And, you know, and that correlates with housing in town, because as a landlord, I've also found it difficult to find like year-round tenants when we have a seasonal workforce. So there's these kind of convergent issues of people living in vehicles because it is seasonally, you know, useful, and a kind of lack of explicitly seasonal housing to accommodate a lot of those workers. So I understand why the county has gone in this direction. We're certainly not the only municipality that has gone in that direction. But I do think, just a personal anecdote, because Telluride has gone this option a long time ago, and I have received like illegal camping notices just for having a van parked in the town when I wasn't actually inhabiting it. Whereas like many nicer vehicles that people were clearly staying in would not get such treatment. And so I've seen firsthand how this has the potential to fall differently according to socioeconomic lines. So this does feel like a longer conversation, and that's sort of my general thoughts on it.
I think it's difficult to have discussions around how to effectively address this through policy without running into those types of issues. And I also think it's difficult to address all of those issues all at once. And even just in this call, we've raised the need for, or the potential need, I should say, for alternate forms of housing that are not, fully erected single family homes, such as whether it's tiny homes or additional needs for manufactured home communities. I think Mila's point, staff's point, that this is specific to camping on private property where somebody may use an RV as either an illegal B&B or to have renters or guests stay, which creates a impact to the local residents. And we've also discussed in this call that we've allowed so many different uses to go into our residential communities. I mean, we are a county dealing with a lot of very, very big issues coming to a head all at once. And I think it's important as a body that we recognize that we're not going to be able to solve all those issues perfectly, and that we may need to slice them up in our recommendations that we make to the county council. But that doesn't mean that we are not considering the larger issues and certainly those socioeconomic effects that, different groups of people, different neighborhoods with different characteristics that represent those socioeconomic effects are likely to be enforced differently and already are. So I think just as we're weighing this in our recommendation to county council, we should be really clear in the fact that what we are weighing right now is an update to the code that would specifically help the county more effectively enforce illegal camping on private property, knowing that there are other larger issues. Now, it's possible we as a body still choose to send a negative recommendation, but I just think we need to be clear about what it is we're addressing. And maintaining that scope, or sending this back to the county attorney and staff and saying, we don't think this effectively addresses this issue.
I agree with what Emily just said. I don't think this is, there's a lot of things that might be considered camping. This is definitely not aimed at someone's grandkids camping in the backyard. And I seriously doubt that it would ever be enforced in that situation.
But it doesn't say that though.
Okay. Well, but sometimes it's hard to draw bright lines. I think what it is aimed at least my understand, there are houses that have like lots of RVs parked in the yard, sometimes in rentals, sometimes more permanent residence, but it's kind of the equivalent of having, 3 ADUs instead of just 1 ADU. So I think if we do just doing nothing leaves a very big loophole in our, trying to enforce various density things. I think if we do want to create more housing, more opportunities, that should be done in a more orderly way. We've got lots of things we've passed over the past 2 or 3 years that allow for density increases, like the HDH thing, or allowing ADUs in pretty much all zones. So I think that's if it's just a question of housing, I think that's the way to do it. If it's short-term rentals, I don't think that should be allowed in residential neighborhoods, and I think it does. I can think of specific examples of people who, where that does appear to be going on, and I think it's good to have a tool to address that. So I think it's impossible to find some kind of definition that's going to exactly fit every single edge case or gray area that we're after. But I think we should ask ourselves, are we better off, with something like this on the books or without it? And I think there is a very definite problem we're having right now without this kind of definition.
I had a couple questions. One was, is the reason we're discussing this now, is it sort of a complaint based? And if so, were the complaints mostly, illegal Airbnb type situations? And then my other question was, for a while in the county, and we were allowing businesses to allow someone, a manager, to live on site in their vehicle. And is that something that is currently still allowed? And then would that no longer be allowed?
Great. So we are definitely addressing this because of a huge increase in complaints. These are they range from kind of disorderly conduct of people living in substandard RVs with no sewer hookups, who are, kind of visually going out back to pee into areas that are potentially sensitive with water. That is one category of complaint. We've had a few of those. The other complaint is people whose neighbors are using RVs to rent out as like Airbnbs and things like that. And of course, they're not, following the OAO standards. They don't pay TRT taxes. They don't have, any of the permits that they would need. For the most part, this is, so it's driven by those complaints. And then also the reason that we want to be able to have, a plan for when people are, or how people are living on their lots, is largely a public health and safety perspective. So our health inspector has been able to take care of some of these situations with what's available to him in the health and safety code as far as needing to connect to a sewer system. And that is, that's why we have permitted RV campgrounds, because they are site planned and they have sewer and power, and they've taken care of all the basic sanitation needs. So we have taken care of some of these complaints via that route. However, it would be, and it is a lot easier for the county to have a better definition of what camping and campgrounds are, so that we can take care of some of these other complaints, because a lot of the enforcement relies on witnesses. And so, for instance, if somebody isn't seeing someone, leaving the RV and just using the woods as their toilet, then, we don't technically have evidence to send the health inspector in. Even if that's known to all of the neighbors that that's what's happening. And we are not excited about making people take pictures of things like that. So this is in response to those kinds of complaints. Like I said, they've been very diverse, and we do have quite a lot of them. We do have a section in our code, to answer your second question, regarding employee housing in RVs, and that is not affected by this at all. It's already called the employee housing exception. We allow, I believe it's 5 or 6 RV spots on the same property as the business has their operations. And the way that works is that they are required to go through the full site planning process and have sewer hookups and I believe also power. So, we, for instance, had a business go through that process just recently, and it was determined that they were actually too far in the floodplain to be able to provide sewer service. And so, that's the kind of thing that we want to be able to catch without just having people, show up and start dumping wherever happens. So there's a few different angles, but yes, it's been mostly code driven, and no, the employee housing exception would not change.
And thank you, Mila. I'm just rereading this definition in the background. Brian, to your question around whether we're being clear, by saying temporarily residing, that is inherently excluding people who already have a residence on the property. So I think it's, my suggestion of new language is probably redundant, given that, the way this is framed is very clearly seeking residence temporarily or otherwise.
I don't think it's very clear.
Well, for the sake of those who would be enforcing it, for the sake of those who would be enforcing it or defending it in court, there's, by seeking residence versus having residence on the property, you have a, like, I trust the county attorney to have done her diligence here, given the intent of this and considering the constitutionality of it. Here's what I'd like to recommend just to keep us moving forward. If anybody has any amended changes that they would like to propose, let's handle those now. Otherwise, let's call the motion and put this to a vote, whether or not to. Yes, Brian, go ahead.
I would like to make an amendment to the motion to change the word camping to living in campers or living in a structure, somehow worded that way, rather than say camping as a prohibited use, to living or renting a camper or a structure, somehow word it that way rather than just say camping.
In the definition or in the term?
In the term itself, yeah.
Okay. So
I'm not sure exactly. I mean, to flow right, somehow change the word camping to living or having a temporary unit rented to you. I mean, somehow have the definition changed and also the term just camping, because when you say camping as a prohibited use, it's in my mind, majority of the public are going to say, well, we can't camp anywhere, and I don't think it's very clear. And I oppose the wording right now as is.
Like temporary accommodations, is that what you're seeking, something to that
Yeah,
end?
temporary accommodations would work. Yeah.
Okay, so Brian moves to amend the code changes as included in the packet to remove the term camping in the definitions and replace it with temporary accommodations. Is there a second for that motion? All right, for lack of a second, that motion fails, though it will be noted as far as our staff report to the County Commission. Are there any other amendments that anyone would like to propose?
I don't have an amendment per se, but I do wonder whether certain, pathways to legitimacy of certain exclusions might exist, because it does seem like there's sort of, there's good users and there's bad users in this situation. And I feel like it's sort of like the abusers who are causing a pretty blanket action to be had, and kind of to Kevin's point of like potentially multiple or the equivalency of multiple ADUs, I wonder if there is a pathway towards legitimizing a temporary structure as basically the equivalency of a permitted ADU or things of that nature. Does that make any sense?
So Josie, one thing you might do here is direct staff that, and we don't need we can include this in a motion. I don't think it's necessary to include that in their characterizing of this in their staff report for the public hearing in front of the County Commission, so that the County Commission has the clear intent in front of them and also has examples of how we might address these other use cases, to be clear that to ensure that this does not erroneously remove that sort of public need and public use.
Okay.
So is that something?
I would encourage both a pathway to find legitimate ways for these to be an ADU use. Additionally, I think a distinction needs to be made between, say, someone's house guests who sleep overnight in an RV or even like a fifth wheel on their property versus like an overnight rental. I think those are two very different things. And that is where, I wonder whether due diligence could be made of, this is my house guest, they're using my amenities, including my plumbing and my sewer, but they're camping. So not just people who live in the house, but people who are guests, I guess. I wonder about some of these like gray areas. And I'd like to see a path towards more legitimate uses versus things like overnight accommodations or like long-term use that creates a public nuisance.
So let's address those two things separately, because I think those things are things we'll need to either have an amendment on or pick up as a second item. And Garish, I see your hand. Let me just really quick split this up. So we have this question of how does this affect the current way that we approach ADUs in the county? Let's put that one aside, because I think having staff comment on that makes more sense. As far as your comment that we should discriminate between, I have a friend staying over on Friday night who's coming up from Flagstaff in their RV and they want to park in my driveway, from somebody who's planning. Now, my reading of this is that case would be illegal. It might not be something the neighbors are to call in on enforcement, but it is something that would, should this pass, not be legal under county standards. Yeah. And so I would say if it's something you'd like to see explicitly addressed, I think it's best if you proposed an amendment to address this language so that we can send a recommendation to the County Commission with that, if that amendment were to pass. Otherwise, it's something that we're just going to have to consider in a future item, or should this not pass as our recommendation and then not pass at the County Commission level, could be something that the county attorney could take up in the future. Was that clear? So I think if you want to make an amendment on that one, and then let's talk about the ADU case separately.
Sure, we definitely I understand the ADU use separate. And I think similarly, I feel like there's so many definitions within camping, and I would like to see that parsed out more and not just kind of one at a time, because I can just think of a lot of instances where I feel like this is more acceptable than this. And if something is a generator issue, that's a noise issue. And if something is a public toilet issue, that's another issue, and really parse out like what is objectionable and what can be permitted because it's not objectionable or there's mitigations. So I don't have a motion. I would encourage that definition is just expanded and dissected more.
Okay, Garish or Mila, if you want to address that.
Yeah, just really quickly. A lot of it is also that the building department is just not going to permit substandard structures also from a health and safety and liability perspective.
That would be the ADU question?
Yeah.
Okay. Garish?
5 or 6 years ago, it was fairly soon after Zachariah came to the county as a county employee. He came up with a proposal, and this addresses your ADU issue, a proposal to allow trailers, camp RV type trailers, to be parked permanently on lots as long as there was a gravel pad, electric and sewer hookup. And there was a big pushback from the county and it didn't pass. Now that's something that I think that we could propose again, look at again, to see if the mood of the county commission has changed since that time. But we have addressed it, and I thought we came up with good mitigation for the ADU issue using RV type structures. So I just wanted you to be aware of that, Josie.
And more specifically, I think it was the county building department that had very strong objections.
They did.
I recall being in the county council meeting, and I think their argument carried the day. But
yeah.
Garish is right. That was several years ago, and the council has changed, and perhaps that idea could be brought back again.
And didn't also Grand County Water and Sewer have some issue because they didn't know what the utility costs would be of that, or was it just the building department?
Well, I think part of the issue was, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Garish, but I think the proposal was on the table was that you could have basically an RV or some kind of travel trailer as an ADU, but it would have to be on a foundation. It would have to have a sewer hookup, and that has a impact fees, and so it made the whole thing much more expensive. And so it kind of took away some of the advantages of having a really cheap trailer.
Yeah, I think you're right, Kevin. But in light of camping, if somebody pulls up with an RV and they want to camp in your backyard or in your driveway or something, personally, I think if we looked at this issue again and said, that's fine if that's going to happen, fairly frequently because you have a lot of RV friends and they like to come up and camp in people's driveways, come up with some minimum standards that would make it legal rather than illegal for them to do that.
And I agree with you, Garish, because the way if this passes, it's going to make it illegal to do so. So I
keep
totally
in
agree
mind. Sorry, Brian. I didn't mean to speak over you. I apologize for that. That was rude. Trying to get my internet. Just keep in mind, though, that a lot of these illegal Airbnbs are sustainable because the person says, oh, it's just my friend. Oh, this is my friend Josh who's staying over for the night. And that's how they get around this. And there's this is a messy issue. The intent here is the county is asking for the county commission's help on our recommendation, up or down, to help them enforce this use of illegal camping. If you have somebody who's staying for the night and you go over and tell your neighbors, hey, I have a friend who's coming in, they're going to be staying on my driveway, and your neighbor says, cool. The reality is the county is not patrolling. They're not sitting here asking if this is your RV or your guest's RV. And, there is a degree to which this is there to protect neighbors, not to try and create neighbor versus neighbor attacks. And I'm not trying to speak for the county attorney or justify this, but I just think, we need to keep in mind What is the intent that we're trying to get at here? Now, if we want to send a negative recommendation and then say to the county commission, we don't recommend taking this on until you address these other issues, it's within this body's control to make that recommendation. But Josie, I see you have a comment. Then I think we need to call this question one way or another and move forward with a recommendation to the county commission.
Sure. I mean, so to that point specifically, it also seems to be my understanding that some of the like overnight rentals that are in residential neighborhoods have similar, you know, kind of similar loopholes that they're finding where it's like, oh, I've got friends staying, but they're actually like illegally overnight rentals. But I don't see the same sort of efforts going towards that use. I mean, I know the intent is there, but this seems to be specifically be targeting a certain demographic and a certain user. So that again, just reinforces my worry that this is something that falls a little bit more on socioeconomic lines. And I think that's for that reason, I'm just hesitant to go with it as worded.
Okay. All right. Last call for any amendments to the motion. Otherwise, we'll call the question. Are there any amendments? All right. So let me restate the motion, which was made by Brian and seconded by Garish, I believe. We are voting on the motion to forward a favorable recommendation to County Commission to approve. Brian?
Made by OB.
Oh, I apologize. Thank you. And seconded by Garish, yes? Sorry, my brain. Made by Bob O'Brien, seconded by Garish, to forward a favorable recommendation to County Commission to approve the proposed ordinance amending the sections as written in the packet of the Grand County Land Use Code. So all in favor of sending a favorable recommendation, raise your hand. Okay, Kevin, Emily, Bob, all opposed? Josie, Garish, Rachel, were you for or against? I'm sorry, I couldn't see your hand. You're muted. Rachel, you're muted.
I saw Rachel raise her hand. I thought she voted for.
Yeah, I'm undecided, I think. I'm undecided here.
Okay, well, if you're undecided, we're going to end up with a draw. So are you, it's just fine. You can abstain.
Okay, I'm going to say it needs a little more, it needs to be reworked a little more. So,
okay, well, I think we need to send a positive or a negative recommendation one way or another. That's what we had discussed a few months ago at one point. Did we get clarification on that, Mila?
I believe that was the goal. But, you know, we have had a situation where the motion was for a positive recommendation and and then it failed for lack of majority. So that is kind of failed positive recommendation, which means there's no recommendation, is how we interpreted that for County Commission.
Okay.
I think if any of the commissioners want to make a motion for a negative recommendation, they're free to do so.
I would like to make a motion for a negative recommendation as worded, because I feel like it needs tweaked more and to more reflect the illegal camping and the illegal bed and breakfasts and things, and not just the general overnight as your family member comes in camping. I think
okay,
it's.
I'm gonna separate your motion from your comments. So,
I know.
State your motion one more time. We'll get a second, and then we'll do comments.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Emily, could I just make one point? It would also be possible to recommend approval for part of these amendments, because this is not the only thing that we're discussing in this LUC amendment. There's actually quite a few other items in here. So if commissioners wanted to maybe just separate out the sections that deal with camping as not favorable, we could potentially move forward with the rest of them if that was the will of the Planning Commission.
So maybe before Brian makes his negative motion, maybe I'll just make a motion to endorse all of the proposed changes except the ones having to do with camping.
Okay, so I'm not totally sure which light items those are, but let it reflect in the minutes that Kevin is proposing that any of the listed items that don't address camping a
Second.
Second. Yeah.
okay. All
Beat you
right.
to it,
Sorry,
Bob.
I'm just going to clean this up for a second. So motion made by Kevin Walker to send a favorable recommendation to the county commission to approve the proposed ordinances in the packet that do not address camping of the Grand County Land Use Code, seconded by Garish. So let's take that and then we'll deal with everything else. So all in favor of
Maybe
Kevin's
just
motion?
to clarify, just so people know what they're voting on, some of this is like changing the title of, Director of Community Economic Development.
Mhm.
Some of this is allowing retail uses in the highway commercial zone. And what else was there, Mila?
So this is excluding 3.1.1C. This is excluding, sorry, I'm scrolling, 3.4.7A, which is adding camping to the uses not included. And this is excluding the 10.2, the definitions.
And the only thing you were missing, Kevin, was also permitting wholesale trade in highway commercial or in retail.
Okay, so motion by Kevin, seconded by Garish. All in favor? Raise your hand. Okay, that one's unanimous. Now we will entertain a second motion addressing 3.1.1C, 3.4.7A, and 10.2, which is the amendment to the definitions. So Brian, did you want to make a motion on that?
I do, but I'm not sure how to word it.
Let me try. I'll try to make Brian's motion. I'm going to vote against it, but let me try to express what he was saying. So the Planning Commission forwards an unfavorable recommendation to the proposed changes having to do with camping. And the reason for this is that
no reasons. You make the motion and then we second it and then we talk about why.
Can't we attach reasons? I mean, if it's just a recommendation.
Okay, I guess so.
I'll be.
I think we can.
Try and follow Robert's rules.
Better job of distinguish, and we wish to convey to the county commission that the reason we're disapproving is I think it needs to be a better job of distinguishing between like illegal overnight use and just friends camping in their backyard, informal camping.
Okay, is there a second?
I second it.
All right, so a motion by Kevin, seconded by Brian, to forward an unfavorable recommendation on the areas of the codes in our packet addressing camping for the reason that we recommend that these changes do a better job discriminating between use by residents and their guests and uses such as illegal overnight camping.
So discussion without an unfavorable recommendation for the camping related language, would it just go back to the staff to rework it, or is it dead, or what is
This
that?
recommendation is still going to go to the county commission, so they'll get two different items. Instead of addressing these as one item, they'll get two items. One is this everything else changes that they would vote on up or down. The second is this anything related to camping, which they would vote on up or down. They can vote in favor of it, even if we send an unfavorable recommendation. They may choose to act on an unfavorable recommendation if this motion passes, in which case they may vote this down and it would go back to the county attorney to make changes. And of course, the county attorney, I think in the meantime, can intercept it and make changes if she thinks that it's reasonable to do so. So those are the three different ways that this could play out. We do want the county commission to trust our opinion. And so, we hope that they will listen to our voices, but of course they don't have to. They're not required to make the same call that we do. So any discussion on this?
If when this comes up before the county commission, if you feel strongly about this, you might want to show up and, say it yourself instead of letting Mila present, your ideas.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to say I'm not going to vote in favor of this because I think it's impossible to draw a line that gets exactly the things we want to allow and excludes all the things we don't want to allow. And that's kind of up to enforcement, and enforcement is complaint driven. And I just think we'll be better off, passing it as is. So that's my 2 cents worth.
Okay. Any other comments? All right, so let's call the question on this second motion made by Kevin to send a unfavorable recommendation on these 3 items for the reason that the changes as written need to do a better job discriminating between those two different use cases. So all in favor of forwarding a negative recommendation on these items, raise your hand. Okay, that's 3. All opposed? Kevin, Emily, Brian, Rachel. So that means that the motion fails to send. All right, here's what we've just done. We have said, for those that don't deal with camping, we're saying to the county commission, hey, we recommend passing these. For those that don't include camping, we are failing to send a positive recommendation, but we are also failing to send a negative recommendation. So essentially the ball is in their court. That means we have one last chance if we'd like to make it. Go ahead, Kevin.
I was just going to say, hopefully Mila will convey to them that the planning commission is split, and a lot of planning commissioners have concerns about making these kinds of distinctions, and other planning commissioners thought it was okay as written, and it's roughly 50-50 on that.
And staff does a really great job of representing the conversation. And of course, we have Jalen on this call as well. So one last thing before we move on to the next public hearing, I just want to bring up that there's been a lot of big issues that have come up this meeting. Any planning commissioner can get one of these items on the agenda. If you have something that you want to bring into a future meeting, whether it's a conversation about how we should approach camping inside of this county unrelated to this type of use, whether it is uses such as tiny homes or mobile home communities, or excuse me, manufactured home communities, you don't feel like you need to wait until one of these issues come up to voice your concern about that. If it's something that you think we should bring up, you can contact Mila, write up an agenda item. We'll decide whether to get it on an agenda. Formally speaking with our bylaws, the chair controls the agenda. But if it's something you want to bring up, like let's have those conversations, because I think it's important as we're talking about all of this, whether it's the small area plan and trying to figure out what does that mean for the county. The way that we look ourselves holistically is also part of planning. And so if this is something that you don't think is effectively addressed by the land use code today, and you have a specific recommendation or policy recommendation, policy objective that you think we should bring up to bring to the county commission, please do so, because we want to make sure that we are helping to guide that conversation and not waiting until staff or county commission brings something back to us. So I just, yes. And I know that these are all it's a very sensitive time. Okay, with that, we are going to move on to our second public hearing of the evening, which is our recommendation on the small area plan that we have been working on, and staff has done an incredible job working on and driving over the last several months. Again, the way we'll do this is staff will present a report, any updates to this plan that from our last meeting they'd like to call out. We will save discussion amongst planning commissioners on the merits of changes specifically that we'd like to see until after our public hearing, and we've had a chance to hear from the public. And then we'll call after discussion, we'll ask for a motion on this. So Mila.
So everybody should be intimately familiar with all the details of this plan by now. We dressed it up a little bit. Amy has some amazing InDesign skills that we get to take advantage of now. So we've prettied the package and kind of condensed it and also given it a potential home in the code. We are proposing this small area plan with the scenic resource protection area being called section 4.8 of the Grand County Land Use Code. So the small area plan itself would actually just be a separate document. And then we have pieced together where some of these changes would be slotted into the land use code. So you'll see the intention or the vision statement and the viewshed standards would be in section 4.8. And this is a new section, and that would be called the scenic resource protection area. And this was one of the reasons we wanted to do it that way is because there was some discussion about potentially having the option to extend these standards and this vision to other areas in Moab, just as the scenic resources. So then we also have the proposed updated resort special use table that we went through. And that would, of course, just modify that section in the land use code. And then we have the viewshed standards as well, and those would be in that section 4.8. And I believe that's all the, oh, and then we have the boundary map as well. And the boundary map would be adopted as section 4.8 in the scenic resource protection area.
So Mila, this section 4.8, that's not actually in the packet?
That would be, it's new. So that would be, that's where we would put the scenic resource protection area vision statement, the boundary map, and the viewshed standards. It's a proposed new section 4.8 of the land use code.
Okay, but we don't have the exact wording for that section 4.8 in the packet. Is that
not, I mean, not in ordinance form. No, we were waiting on the ordinance for the county commission meeting.
And then the viewshed standards.
That's our general practice. Sorry. What was that?
Okay. And then there's a page, let me see which one it is. You know, it's got, at the bottom, it has proposed additional standards. That's what would go in section 4.8. Yeah, so there's a page where in the bottom it says viewshed standards. And then you've got the OAO things, and then the ridgeline thing in the middle, and then at the bottom, additional standards. Those additional standards, is that what would become section 4.8?
Sorry, I'll have to get back to you as soon as the rest of my packet loads. It's not showing up on my computer, sorry. And as far as the language goes, the vision statement would largely be what the section 4.8 would be. So we have pretty much already defined that. The only addition would be the kind of standard language around the different sections of our code. Okay, there's that one.
Garish?
If we're recommending that this area be all in rezoned resort special, we're not.
No.
Okay.
We are recommending that. Okay, and actually, Kevin, I don't see the additional standards one that you're talking about.
Can we go back to my question?
Yes. We are recommending that the resort special zone be the preferred zone were there to be a rezone application for that area.
Okay, so my question has to do with the ridgeline standards that would apply to this land primarily because it's a highway, commercial, and range and grazing. But at a particular time, if the scenic objectives were being met, then the ridgeline standards would no longer be applicable. Is that correct?
I'm not sure. So essentially what's happening here is we are proposing that these viewshed standards, so ridgeline standards are already in our code. These are what we're calling viewshed standards, which are in addition to that.
Right.
So what we're proposing.
Ridgeline standards do not apply to resort special.
The ridgeline standards currently don't apply to resort special?
Correct.
Okay. If that's the case.
That's my question is, what is going to happen to the ridgeline standards in the small area plan if areas are rezoned resort special?
Right. So the viewshed standards are the stronger standards, and they also include the ridgeline standards. And those would be immediately applied to the entire area up there, regardless of zone. So it's essentially an overlay that allows for stricter viewshed protection standards. So it doesn't matter what the underlying zone is, the ridgeline standards and these viewshed standards would be applied to all of the properties on that boundary map.
Well, then I think it's important to say part of this package would be applying the ridgeline standards to resort special.
Garish, I think the way it goes is there's going to be some kind of polygon drawn for like this viewshed protection area. And that's going to include all the lands in the planning area, regardless of how they're zoned. Some are range and grazing, some are resort special. And then there would be the section 4.8, which would apply to everything within that polygon. Is that correct, Mila?
Yes, that's right.
So Garish, if you were concerned that we ever had resort special elsewhere in the county, that wouldn't be included in this anyway, because this is the small area plan to this specific area. So we would have to address that in a different way.
I have a
Oh, wait, I think,
Question.
sorry, Kevin, I think had one more comment. Bob, and then
Yeah, I guess I wanted to try again with my question to Mila. So page 31 has a bunch of standards that are broken into 3 subsets. So my understanding now is that all of those will go into section 4.8 then, but some of those are just repeating things that apply to overnight accommodations, and some are repeating things that apply on the existing ridgeline areas, and then the ones in the bottom are brand new standards that aren't in our code currently. Is that?
So you're looking at the view shed standards page.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Oh, and the additional standards within view shed standards. That's where I was confused. I thought you were looking at a page that had a whole footer that said additional standards. So what these are, so these first ones, the Grand County OAO standards would apply, and the red lines and the green addition are what would be changed in those. The ridgeline standards are yes, those are all consistent with code, and then the additional standards are all new. And that's a good point. Those additional standards should all be probably underlined in green. These are just the changes from what we had all looked at together before.
Okay. And then I guess additionally, that middle section, the ridgeline standards, the language you have in here specifies like within 2 miles of the center line of US 191 and Highway 128. Probably all of that should be struck, right? Because now the area that's being defined to is this visual protection zone.
It can be.
Suggesting that's a drafting error.
We had talked previously about just kind of including them, but they absolutely can be modified to suit our purposes better.
To that end, just for clarification, and Bob, I know, sorry you're waiting, but just to clarify on Kevin's point, is there if this view shed area were to expand at some point in the future beyond the boundaries of the small area plan that we're currently looking at, those two could be separated in the sense of we could expand the view shed protection area without expanding the limits of the small area plan itself, in which case there's a possibility where those items could at some point in the future be relevant, Kevin? And I may be misunderstanding. So that's a question for clarification, not a statement.
My thought is that the bridgeline standards are looser, less stringent than the other standards for scenic protection that are below that. And so I would suggest if we don't need the ridgeline standards to be in this small area plan, that we just strike it.
I think we do, because right now the ridgeline standards apply in certain specific areas in the county, and not the whole county. And then we've got this other area to the north where we want to apply a bunch of standards, including the ridgeline standards and a bunch more. So,
but I think the other standards are better describe the protection of the visual resources than the ridgeline standards do.
You're saying the ridgeline standards are redundant given all the other things? I thought that included some things that weren't already in there.
Sorry, I'm going to hit the pause button because we're going down the road that I'm participating in this, that I said we weren't going to go, which was talking about specific changes until after we've had public comments. So I'm sorry. Let's put the pause on that and come back to specific recommended changes. Bob, you had a comment as well.
Oh, I had a question for Mila. And I never remember the areas. Of course, we've got the map now, and then we have the 2 miles from the road. That includes Sitla property. Is that right?
It does. It doesn't include we took out, as per commission's suggestion, the parcels to the west because they were, I believe, up on the mesa. But it does include the Sitla land on the east. And I have actually been in contact with Sitla, and they have made some proposals based on all of these proposed standards for those parcels. So we do have buy-in from them as well.
It could be, because I do actually have a funny comment, which is in the background section of, so you have, as you go into this section, there's a background. It's actually not in the document itself. and it says that it kind of indicates that this would apply to private property. And I am worried about legislative intent at some point. If anybody ever wanted to go back and said, well, you know, when they passed this out of committee, it was based on private property. And I might suggest that it's non-federal property that we want this to apply to.
And where was that in?
So let's see if I can, I can get to it here.
Page 26. I've got it open.
Yeah. So it's where you have recommendations and then background. So it's kind of at the
in the
sheet
agenda
that
summary.
That's right. And
Got it. Okay.
It mentioned private property, and we should maybe when it goes to the consul, it could just say non-federal property.
Great. Thank you.
That's a great suggestion. Before we make other changes though, any other questions for staff clarifying any changes in the packet? And then we're going to open up public hearing, and then we'll save our conversation about the specifics of what we may or may not recommend for after that. So any other just clarifying questions for staff? Okay, so at 6:33, if you are listening on YouTube, we are about to open our public hearing. We are opening our public hearing. And the information to join, we've already shared. You can go to the agenda item in the county website, click on the TV icon and see that information to join. If you have a comment you'd like to make, if you could just post in the chat and we'll call you in the order that you speak, and we'll try and keep comments to 3-ish minutes so that we can be equitable to everybody. So if
Emily,
you'd like
do you want to read out the phone number to join that way as well?
Yes.
In case people don't have the.
Is that the one with the hash? Do I have to read the pound signs?
No, you can just read any of the phone numbers out of the invite.
Okay. Let's see if I can do this correctly. You can call in on mobile by dialing 1-346-248-7799. I'm going to say that one more time. 1-346-248-7799. And the passcode you're going to need is 178954. 178954. And apologies.
And they also need the meeting ID.
And you'll need the meeting ID, which is, goodness. All right. 854-7258-6014. So I'm going to do that one last time just to be sure. 854-7258-6014 is the meeting ID. 178954 is the passcode. All right. So with that, we will open our public hearing. If you'd like to make a comment, post in the chat that you'd like to speak. Okay, Reed, you're welcome to come off of mute and make your comment. Please keep it to around 3 minutes just so that if other people want to speak, we're being equitable.
Okay, this is Reed Pendleton, and I've got first are a couple questions, and maybe somebody can just clarify for me. On the night skies lighting, can somebody clarify for me what it means to have light trespass your property? I'm wondering if that's the actual beam of light that's being cast on the ground from the downward shielded fixture, or if that's just being able to see the light, period, from anywhere off site.
Reed, do you mind if you ask your questions first and then we'll address them? I think that's kind of the format we normally follow. Or make your comment, and then if staff wants to address it, we'll do that.
Yeah, I'll just read everything I got, and then if somebody can answer it, that'd be great.
Thank you.
Second question about lighting is about the curfew for turning off lights. I'm concerned about maybe safety hazards for businesses that operate 24/7 that could be built out there or have people frequently coming on and off the properties at night. How does that work if a business is operational 24 hours a day? Also, if light fixtures are downward and shielded to not trespass light off the property, then why would they need to be turned off at 11 anyway? So that's my second question. And then my last comment is in relation to the permitted uses for the resort special zone use table. I think there are some other uses that could make sense in the right kind of master plan development for the area. So my question is this: if a restaurant building is acceptable, if a theater building is acceptable, if homes are acceptable, if other types of buildings are acceptable when built to the new standards, then why wouldn't other uses held within buildings be acceptable uses like office, gas station, retail stores, convenience stores, small grocery stores, etc.? If we're able to see master plan development proposals that provided benefits to town, like reduced vehicle trips by visitors to town, less congestion at restaurants and retail shops, and other benefits to keep people north of town, then why wouldn't we want to encourage that kind of growth in this area? And it just seems to me like the purpose of the area plan was to protect the visual impact of development entering into the Moab area. So if it's all visual impact, then why are the uses whittled down to just a couple random permitted uses? I just feel like that there's potential to allow some mixed use developments that make sense having different uses. Thank you.
All right, thank you for your comments. And Mila, as far as those first two, just around the light trespass, could you answer the question that he brought up for the record in case anybody else has that question?
Sure. So light trespass is the beam of light falling on your neighbor's property. And as far as turning lights off at night, we would never make a situation unsafe. So that's certainly part of the exceptions to that.
All right. Is there anybody else who'd like to make a public comment? Liz, you're welcome to join. If you could state your full name, please.
Thanks, Emily. My name is Liz Thomas, and I just wanted to applaud the Planning Commission for taking all the public comments into consideration. I know there were hundreds and hundreds of residents that responded, and this is a really special place to a whole lot of people that live here. And I just appreciate the Planning Commission taking all that into account, and for y'all's hard work on, I guess, all the bullets under the SRPA is intended to category in the vision statements. Those are really, they're well written, and I think they'll be helpful in the future for developers that come, and the county commission that has to make hard decisions. So I appreciate it. I can't quite visualize how it's going to fit into the land use code, but I appreciate your hard work on this, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments, Liz. Would anybody else like to make a public comment? All right. With that, we will close the public hearing. And just because of technology issues earlier, if for whatever reason you're trying to join and you're joining in 5 minutes, just please make a comment in chat. Wonderful. All right. So now we'll come back to these questions around changes that we were discussing that we might like to see. So questions around striking the ridgeline standards. I think we already addressed OB's recommendation as far as the legislative intent in the background of the staff report. So why don't we come back to Garris's comments that Kevin was weighing in on related to the ridgeline standards. Garris, would you mind just framing it as like a specific recommendation you'd like to see, whether it's striking them entirely, and then we can address them?
I think the ridgeline standards are really hard to enforce. I've got numerous examples in the county or in Spanish Valley where the way I read the standards, they have not been met for various reasons with new developments. But I think that I don't know that we would harm the strength of the objectives if we struck them, because the other standards are strong enough to take care of the visual and scenic issues that we're concerned about. So that's just one person's opinion, but I mean, I don't think it would hurt to keep them in, but if this is going to be rezoned resort special, then the ridgeline standards should be modified to also include resort special as one of the zones for any of those areas that are more than the 2-mile distance from Highway 191.
So thinking to your early advice, Kevin, of having a motion on the table that we can amend, I realize we're backwards again. But let's just address this one and then we'll go ahead and ask for a motion on the larger thing. And then any changes we'll make as amendments. Is there, just straw poll wise, who would like to see ridgeline standards be struck? Is there a consensus for that? Garish, all right. The other thing I heard you call out, Garish, was that maybe more broadly, this is something we might want to bring into the resort special area countywide. Granted, we recognize that resort special is just within this area. For lack of a consensus of this change, I recommend as we continue to go through the land use tables separate from this particular exercise of the small area plan, that maybe we bring that up and address it as part of that. Okay, so let's ask for, does somebody want to make a motion as stated or in their own words as guided by the staff report? Let's see if we can get a motion on the table and then we can address any amendments off of that. Kevin?
I can try to make the motion. I'm attempting to make the motion that's in the packet. So I move to forward a favorable recommendation to the Grand County Commission to adopt the proposed small area plan for 313/191, including updates to the resort special zone allowed uses and adoption of new section 4.8 scenic resource protection area and associated viewshed standards.
Is there a second? Bob seconds. All right, so Kevin, why don't you start discussion along with anything else you'd like to see addressed?
I don't have a big statement to make at the beginning. I think there are some specific edits I want to propose making, but I don't, if someone else has general comments, they can go first.
Okay. Bob, you're up next.
Hang on. As I move over to the section, I actually have a suggested change in wording, if that's appropriate now.
So what we'll do is we could discuss it and then we'll address them one by one as individual amendments.
Great. So this is, let's see, it's so hard with this on the screen, but I'm going to do it. Right after the vision statement, you go down a couple of pages and it has additional standards.
This is page 29 in the packet.
It might well be. I'd say halfway down, a little over halfway down, it says, let's see if I can get it. Removal of existing vegetation must be minimized and site controls during construction to establish which vegetation to save shall be used. And I think I did this once before and it maybe didn't get in, but removal of native vegetation, I'd say, because you may want to get rid of tamarisk or Russian olive, etc. So I'd suggest the word native vegetation in there. I'm sorry, excuse me. Mary in the background says, you mean non-native. That's all right. So I want to make sure that it's okay to remove non-native vegetation.
All right, for efficiency's sake, why don't we just go through and, unless it's controversial, just make an amendment and vote on it. Make a motion for amendment, excuse me, and vote on it. So Bob, it sounds like you're making a motion to add, under landscaping and disturbance on page 29, removal of existing non-native vegetation. Sorry, what?
It's my page 31.
Oh, am I looking at an older packet? Well, okay. Under viewshed standards, landscaping and disturbance. Can you just state your motion and then we'll vote on it? So.
I've got to move back there.
So I move that we amend that to insert the word native in front of existing.
Okay. Seconded by Bob. Yeah, Bob?
Yes.
Great. All right. Let's just go ahead and vote on this. So all in favor of amending this based on this motion, say aye. Okay. Unanimous. So I know it's a little laborious, but we'll just go through one by one, and that way we have it recorded. So I make that
And
change.
so who's taking notes on all these things? Is it Olivia or Mila or Emily? Both of you?
It's both of us. Olivia is taking the minutes, and then I'm also taking my own notes.
Okay.
And I'm sure Emily is also taking notes.
Red pen out. All right, Brian?
I had a wording amendment to make down in night sky on page 31. I think it's the same page we're on. Like Mila mentioned that it wasn't their intent to force people to turn off their lights at 11 p.m., but it doesn't say that in it. So it says all exterior lights must be turned off by 11 p.m. We need an exception in that, or maybe I'm not sure how to word it, and also down a couple lines, no light may trespass off the boundary, maybe no direct light or beam light, because the way it reads, no light. If I can see a light on the neighbor's property, I'm seeing some light from their light bulb. And so maybe the two sentences, the wording to maybe include that. I'm not sure how to make it, help me.
Let's address those separately. So trespass
Okay.
has a specific definition here that we already have in our code. So trespassing is like if you have a bulb light and it's shining on the neighbor's property, it's trespassing. If there's just sort of an ambient brightness from their house, that's not the same thing. So we already addressed that inside of the code.
Yeah, I disagree with that, but that's okay. I mean, anyhow, I would just like no direct light may trespass or something. That's what I would propose there.
Okay, let's take your first one first. So how do we currently address the exception for security and safety, Mila, in the code?
So the motion sensor is what's in that right there. So it's like we do intend for lights to be turned off by 11, and then the safety factor is addressed via motion sensor.
So I'll pretend to be, I'll try to channel. What about businesses that want to be open 24 hours a day after 11 p.m.? Do they have to turn the lights off there? Are they just not allowed to stay open, or?
They would have to have them on exterior lights.
Okay.
Or, sorry, motion sensors. They would have to have them on motion sensors. Yeah, so the intention is that it would be dark by 11. And so these particular night sky standards are proposed here from the International Dark Sky Association representative in our county, and then as well, and then were reviewed by the IDA people. So these are just some of the things that they had proposed as slightly stronger standards to preserve more darkness up there than we already have in town. So that's where these came from.
So my question is,
vetted a little bit.
I think we need tweaked.
Garish, go ahead.
So in the dark skies ordinance that was passed a couple of years ago, there are exceptions. There are specific exceptions for commercial properties.
Mm-hmm.
And the way this is not consistent with that, and is that by intent?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have a lot of complaints about a certain business on a hillside in town that is open late and therefore allowed to keep their lights on for a long time. So it was intended to try to prevent that kind of situation, where that exception allows for some, uncomfortable conditions for some people.
Well, if the business that you are referring to is the one that I'm thinking of, those lights are not dark sky compliant anyway.
They are, unfortunately, because they're up on a hillside. And so therefore, even if they're downward shielded, we're all down from the lights.
Well, they're not adequately shielded then.
They are in a lot of ways. In a lot of them, those outdoor lights are shielded. They're just on for safety, which makes sense. I mean, you need it, in that context, but that was the motion sensor intent, so that those wouldn't be on all the time unless somebody was actually using them.
And what about advertising signs?
Mm-hmm.
Would signs be required to be turned off by, illuminated signs be required to be turned off by 11 p.m.? Or would the dark sky standards in our code apply to those?
Yeah, that would be, this is intended to be exterior building lights, not signs or,
Okay.
I don't know what else it would be, but yeah, not signs.
Well, maybe we need to be clear that which types of lights we are talking about, whether, so that there's no miscommunication to business owners about signs that they have that meet our ordinance that are for advertising purposes versus exterior lights for just illuminating the ground.
Can we put in something in there that says excluding all exterior lights excluding signs?
Are there separate standards for signs following dark skies?
Yes and no. They're in the same ordinance.
Okay. So that would apply. Okay.
Yeah, they're already regulated.
I'm just concerned that this document the ordinances eventually are internally in agreement.
So
I think if we add excluding signs to that line, all exterior lights excluding signs. Okay.
Let's address these as a motion just so we can get them on the record and vote them up or down. And keeping in mind, one way or another, that this is also a different area from the more concentrated areas of the county. And part of this exercise is to differentiate it as that gateway, as that sort of specialty area. So, Garish, could you just state your recommendation as a motion, and we will go through and actually line item these. And you're muted. Here you go.
It's going to take a second to get to it, so hang on.
Okay. Well, we can come back to that while you're pulling it up. Did anyone else want to make any recommended changes? Okay. So no one else has any recommended changes that they'd like to make a motion on. All right, so we're just waiting on this one. And maybe if somebody else has their packet open, if they understand what Garish is going for, they could try and make a motion for it.
So another issue I have is on the retail sales and service. All we're including in the table is outfitter guides and facilities. I would say some of the other sales should be included as a conditional use rather than just strictly outfitter and guide services. I mean, like, what does other sales include? I mean, on the table itself. I mean, so my motion would be maybe to include all other sales uses as a conditional use. So other business uses.
Okay, so Brian moves to amend the motion to add all other sales-oriented uses as a conditional use in resort special. Is there a second? Okay. All right. Fails for lack of a second. Garish, are you seconding it, or are you raising your hand?
I'm ready for my amended motion.
Okay. All right. So go ahead, Garish.
All right. So where it says all exterior under night skies, under additional standards, where it says all exterior lights must be turned off by 11 p.m. or be on a motion sensor. We clarify that this does not apply to advertising signs.
Okay, so Garish makes a motion to amend that we add excluding advertising signs after the line, all exterior lights must be turned off by 11 p.m. or be on a motion sensor.
Would it
There's-
make more sense if it just said signs rather than advertising sign? I think that's how they're referred to elsewhere in the code.
So excluding signs, okay.
Okay.
So is there a second to that? Rachel seconds. All right, so all in favor of amending to add excluding signs to the 5th line from the bottom on the viewshed standards page. All in favor? Obi, Brian, Garish, Josie, Rachel, all opposed? Stand alone on that one. Okay.
And just to clarify,
and-
the signs would be, they'd have to fall under the night sky. So they have to be,
Yes, those are county standards.
lit.
Yes.
Kevin, sorry, I don't know how you voted on that one.
I abstained.
Abstained. All right. So that amendment passes. All right. Any additional amendments that anybody would like to suggest?
Yeah, I have a couple. These are, I think, just fixing glitches in the words. They don't have to do with the intent. So one of them is on the same page, and it's the section that comes from the ridgeline standards. And there's this language which says, within 2 miles of center line of 191 or 128 or Mill Creek Road, Spanish Valley Drive, and blah, blah, blah. So that's the language that was telling us where the existing ridgeline standards are supposed to apply. And I think it's just completely out of place in this list where we're trying to talk about what the ridgeline standards are. And we're showing it applies by drawing a polygon, not by staying within certain miles of a road. So I just think that should be struck. And if Mila disagrees, please speak up.
So
And
you would
so-
say within the
so I guess
polygon?
more specifically, well, I mean, no, I'm not saying within the polygon. I mean, all of this, that's going to be said in the preamble somewhere. It applies in this viewshed protection area. So I think what it should say is that, building, just eliminate the whole first half and say buildings shall be located so that the highest elevation of the base of the structure is at least 40 feet below the highest ridgeline of the property. That's my amendment.
Okay.
And I don't think it changes the intent.
Yeah. And you said you had some other things that didn't change the intent, but just were editorial changes. So as long as we're sort of grouping them together, I think we can address those as one.
Okay, but it looks like Garish might disagree with me on this.
Garish? Oh, you're muted, Garish.
Garish, you're muted.
Sorry. This is the reason that I think we should strike the ridgeline standards section out of this in entirety, because I think the other standards that we have are more stringent and meet the objectives better. This gives the way the ridgeline standards are written, it's kind of wiggle room. It's like, oh, it's not suitable there, so we got to go up on top of the ridge to build because, it's 5% slope and we really don't want to build on a 5% slope to be below the ridge line. So that was the reason that I brought it up in the first place. Is I think that the standards that we have are better than the ridgeline standards that are in the code now.
I think it's fine, but I think at the moment the ridgeline standards do not apply at all in this area. And so I think it does no harm to include them. And I think furthermore, we might rewrite the ridgeline standards in the future so that they're easier to determine, and then it would make sense to rewrite them here. So I'm still in favor of my amendment to leave the language in there, although I acknowledge, Garish, that it's not the greatest criterion. I think it might help us a little bit, and it does no harm to leave it in.
So just for the sake of, I know it's procedural, but just for the sake of being clean on this. So Kevin has made a motion that we strike everything up through Spanish Valley Drive and insert the language buildings before shall be located under the Grand County Ridgeline standards on on page 31. Is there a second for that motion, that amended motion to amend? Bob is a second. All right, so all in favor of amending of Kevin's motion? Rachel, Kevin, Obi, Brian, Josie, Emily, all opposed? Okay, Garish opposes. All right, so that change will go in. And now Garish, do you want to make a motion for yours? Or do you want to address that as part of a larger holistic change in the county code later? You're muted again.
I would like to bring up the county ridgeline standards at some point. And if we're expecting the ridgeline standards to apply to this area, which I don't think is necessary because we have stricter standards, we could include them. But if we're going to continue to include the section that Kevin's motion dealt with, that we change the title from county ridgeline standards to just ridgeline standards. Because without the first part that begins within the RR and RG range and grazing zone districts, blah, 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 that is no longer applicable. So it's no longer the county ridgeline standards.
Can I just make one comment on that? Garish, is that's a great point, and we would not be including any of those categories to the left in the final version.
Great.
That's just for us.
Got it. Thank you. That satisfies me.
So Garish, to your point, when we talk about future considerations, let's bring up ridgeline standards and make sure that we talk about that in the future. So can you raise that when we get to that point in the meeting?
If I make it to that point.
Okay, well, let's keep the ball rolling then. Kevin, you said you had a few other changes you wanted to address.
Yeah, I think just one other. This is in the use table. And this zombie provision, which keeps coming back, I think. But all the way at the bottom under agriculture, there are currently Ps beside barn, corral, pen, and another P under farm, orchard, and vineyard. In our September meeting, we discussed those and the consensus was to take them out. So unless Mila tells me that the county commission decided we should put them back in, I would move that we take, stick by our previous decision and take them out.
I don't know that we even need a movement. I think that those are erroneous.
Yeah, that may have just been a mistake on my part. I apologize. Those
Okay,
two
so
are.
do we not need a motion then? But minutes will reflect that those are not supposed to be there.
Right,
Yep.
but
They were
fruit and
typo.
vegetable stand and grazing were supposed to be in there, right?
Correct.
That's what I recall.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry about that.
And unless it's controversial, I don't think we need a motion on that.
Okay.
Okay, any other
That's
changes?
all I have.
That's all you've got? Okay, Rachel, did you have anything you wanted to say?
Yeah, so I had a question under retail sales and service, the outfitter guide service and facility. I wanted to know, we had talked a little bit about how that might include UTV rentals under that. And I don't think, and so I just have a little bit of a concern about that I mentioned before. Because there's so many south of town, I can see an explosion of them north of town as well. And I remember from the comments, I don't know, it'd be nice to know, Mila, if I feel like there wasn't a lot of support from that in the, at least when I read through the comments the first time, but maybe, I don't know, it's almost like that needs to be further subdivided or something.
So just real quick to clarify, I believe that what we had said is that a UTV or ATV place would be considered a vehicle rental, and that is a separate category. And then we also currently do have, of course, the county moratorium on any new ATV, UTV rental places. But, you know, that'll expire, and ideally the county commission will have decided what they would like to do about that. But for those kinds of rental facilities, that would be a vehicle rental. And if the commissioners felt like they wanted to further specify, we could certainly talk about how to do that.
Okay, I mean, if it's a concern of anyone else.
I think it's something we would address outside of this process, but it's something we could look at, especially as we get further direction from the county commission as they near the end of that. Did I understand that correctly, Mila? Versus looking at it specific to this planning area?
I think so. Yeah, especially because they have a specific moratorium, you know, giving them time to decide what to do about future ATV, UTV rentals, and, you know, use of ATV, UTVs in our county. I think it would probably be wise to address that through that process as well, and potentially incorporate whatever their recommendations are into what we have here.
All right. Okay, so let's, just for the sake of keeping things rolling, I'm going to do one last call for any motions to amend. Otherwise, we'll call the question. So is there any changes anybody else would like to make a motion to adopt? Okay. 3, 2, 1. I'm doing what I do for myself in facilitation meetings. With that, we'll call the motion. And what we'll do is, oh, heck, who made this? I have all these notes about these changes, and I believe it was Kevin who made this motion. Yes, thank you. Seconded by OB. So we are voting on Kevin's motion to forward a favorable recommendation to the Grand County Commission to adopt the proposed small area plan for 313-191, including updates to the resort special zone, allowed uses, and adoption of the new scenic 4.8, new section 4.8 scenic resource protection area and associated viewshed standards, subject to the amendments as adopted. So, all in favor of sending a favorable recommendation, a favorable amended recommendation to the county commission on the small area plan, raise your hand. All right, all opposed? All abstaining?
I'll abstain.
And Brian's abstaining. All right, so that is 6 in favor and 1 abstention. All right, that has been a journey. Wonderful. Yay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mila.
We did it.
And thank you to everybody who has chimed in various times throughout this process. You know, this is absolutely meant to be a reflection of public input, and we appreciate everybody's participation to that end. Okay, now we are going to come back around to our action item on the All American Acres Lot 5 subdivision, which Mila, I'll let you lead.
Great. Luckily, this is a very simple subdivision. It would normally be going through the minor records survey process since it's only 3 lots. However, it is already part of the All American Acres subdivision, which is why we're seeing it here. So it's considered technically to be a replat. So this is for another All American Acres subdivision at 4500 Easy Street. This will be, it's a 5-acre parcel. It will be divided into 3 lots. There are existing structures on the property, and this subdivision would actually bring the property into compliance. They currently have 2 full-size dwelling units built prior, so they're non-compliant or legal non-conforming uses. They do have, the only thing that is slightly different is that I believe it's lot 2 has a requirement to install a fire hydrant if the potential property owner decides to build outside of the noted buildable area on the plat. And we did go over that method with the fire department and the surveyor and decided that that was the best route forward for that. Other than that, there are no unusual exceptions to this plat, proposed preliminary plat, and the DRT has approved everything.
All right. Any questions for staff? If not, I'll entertain a motion. Garish?
Okay, I move to approve the preliminary plat for the replat and subdivision of Lot 5 of the All Americans Acres subdivision located at 4500 Easy Street, parcel number 02-OSAA-0005.
All right. Motion by Garish, seconded by OB. Any discussion, Garish?
No.
Okay. Bob?
Basically not. It looks pretty straightforward to me in terms of approvable.
Brian, go ahead.
I'm going to abstain from this because my company is representing the Taylors in the sale of the property. So.
All right. Thank you.
Brian, when Emily asked for disclosures, I think that would have been an appropriate time, but I appreciate you bringing that up now.
I wasn't on. I had a hard time finding the link today. And so I came on later after the disclosures. So, because I was using the old link. So I agree.
Thank you, Brian. All right. Any other discussion? All right. So we'll call the question. All those in favor of the motion as stated in the packet, made by Garish, seconded by OB, raise your hand. All right. All in favor, save for Brian, who abstains. So 6 voting in favor, 1 abstention. Wonderful. All right. That leads us to future considerations. So a couple of things that have come up. One is ridgeline standards. So Mila, I'm just going to ask you to do me a favor and take notes of these because some of these are coming up over and over again, and I think we need to prioritize them on future agendas. So maybe you and Kevin and I can discuss that as we build our next agenda. So ridgeline standards, I think this question of manufactured home communities, tiny homes, the building department at our next meeting is going to give us a presentation, and as part of that, staff is going to include sort of a more holistic look at manufactured homes and potentially tiny homes as their own line item or recommendation on how we might address that, I think is what we talked about earlier.
I can't promise building department participation, but I certainly have their input already.
Totally fine. And the staff could just give their recommendation on how we might approach that in the future. It doesn't have to be a priority in the next month or two, but would be wonderful just to kind of hear staff's opinion on that alongside that larger conversation.
Well, I can definitely have them join us at a meeting. I'm just not sure that it'll be the next one. So I'll have to coordinate with them and make sure that and have them come to one of our meetings soon.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood. That's wonderful. Whenever is convenient for them to review that would be wonderful.
Yeah.
And then Josie, I know that you raised this kind of larger question and it was echoed by a number of commissioners. And I share this opinion of the way that our code addresses, as affordable housing is a stated priority for the county itself. And we've addressed affordable housing through density and we've addressed affordable housing through incentives. But one thing that we really don't have a policy solution or even sort of position on is addressing those for whom housing affordability is beyond their capacity to participate in the housing market, whether that's through the need for more low-income rentals, possibly the need for increased types of housing such as manufacturing home communities or tiny home communities. And then of course, just how we deal with the code enforcement of people who are experiencing homelessness for any period of time. And I don't know how much of that sits within this particular body as far as our ability to address it through code, but it is something I think it would be interesting to ask staff to weigh in on just through the partnerships with other groups looking at this issue to see if there is something that the Planning Commission should take on in order to make some positive movement towards acknowledging the fact that not everybody who lives and works and resides in Grand County is able to rent or own a house or apartment. So I just wanted to let you know, I really heard your comments, and I hope it's something that we can look at more generally. And I know that Kevin is leaving us to join the county commission, and that may be something that he also can provide some insight to down the road. But I think it would be really wonderful, just as we kind of turn the key into the next year, to just to keep an eye on that as something that, if staff has ideas through their own experience or through other communities of things we could take on, that we prioritize that. Was there anything else for future considerations that I missed or that somebody else would like to bring up? All right.
I will just mention that we have the Creekside PUD amendment hearing at County Commission on the 15th. And I know that one was fairly contentious. And then also, I guess just the Dalton rezone. And then there'll be a special events, possibly a special events permit update as a hearing also on the 15th, which does somewhat involve our the planning department, as it is a zoning question. So just keep an eye out for those. They may be of interest.
All right. With that, recent buildings permit review.
All right. So we have 7 new residential construction permits and this is all since October 22nd in Grand County. 3 new residential construction in Castle Valley, which is a big uptick. 2 new commercial construction permits, 1 manufactured home, and then 4 solar. So we had a little bit of an increase over the last couple reports. And I believe that some of those are, if I'm recalling correctly, I do think that some of those are the Straba homes down on All American Acres.
All right. County.
You're right.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Olivia.
Oh, I put the report together from Mila. I was just gonna confirm that they are the Strabe homes.
Awesome. Yeah, so that's 4 of those new construction. Yeah. And those are community rebuilds houses on the Strawburb on Easy Street. So they're getting underway soon. Okay, the county commission report. So there's 2 meetings that have happened since we last met. The least recent one on the 4th, the Puesta del Sol phase 11 final plat was approved, and we will see phases 12 and 13 here in the next few months, and then it'll be done. From 11/17, I believe Jalen or Emily mentioned already that that the county commission approved the administrative hearing process, which will allow us to enforce the code through the civil court rather than as a criminal court, which greatly enhances the ability of the county to at least levy fines, whereas when it was a criminal case, required a lot more background and a lot more work and a lot more proof of criminal activity. Their updated fee schedule was also discussed, and this does include proposed increases to planning fees. So if planning commissioners have any input that they'd like to give on that, please do take a look at the proposed amended fee schedule. I believe they'll be discussing it again at the next meeting, if not voting on it.
All right, thank you. Last thing before we move to adjourn, I just want to remind everybody that applications need to be in by December 1st for the open seats on the Planning Commission. If your term is up and you are reapplying, to make sure that you get those applications in. If you are listening in, or if you're on the Planning Commission and you know somebody who you think would be really great or might be interested, please make sure that they get their applications in on December 1st, by December 1st. And hopefully we'll be able to vote on those in our if not our next meeting, the meeting after, before the end of the year, so that we can roll into 2021 with a full body. So this is a really great way to serve your community. If you have any questions and you're listening in about time commitment, you can reach out to one of us or reach out to planning staff. And I really invite and encourage people to apply. Even if you think that it might not be up your alley, you might be surprised. And Kevin, did you want to say something? Looked like you had
It
your
just
hand up.
occurred to me, do I need to formally resign, or is that kind of implicit? Because
Oh,
I hereby resign effective.
don't resign yet. You have a couple more meetings.
Effective the end of the year. Yeah.
Yeah, either that or get fired.
I think
The bylaws say that you need to write a letter to the county commission resigning if you really want to be, according to Hoyle.
Okay, that's good to know. Thanks, Garish. That was good.
And Mila, I have a question. How are applications going? Do we have some?
We have Josie's. And that's it. So we
that's
really
it.
need to get some applications in. Tell all your friends.
Good.
And
Hard
enemies, everybody you know.
Indeed, absolutely. No, really, this is the opportunity to have your voice be heard. The county is going into a wonderful phase where we get to redefine based off of our input where we want to be in 10 years from now and 20 years from now. And if you want to be an active participant in this conversation, serving on the Planning Commission, serving on any board in the county is a really great way. So highly recommend it. With that, does anyone have a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion, we adjourn.
All right, moved and seconded. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.
Good night.